The first crack of bone was a sickening, wet thunderclap inside her own skull. Elara's world dissolved into white, searing agony. She was on her knees in the frozen mud of the Moonfall Pack's ceremonial clearing, the scent of pine and iron-rich blood clogging her throat. The change wasn't due, the moon was a mere sliver in the twilight sky, but the Alpha's command was a force of nature all its own. Again, Alpha Kael's voice was a low growl that vibrated in the hollow of her chest. Around the torchlit perimeter, the pack watched in silence. Their stares were a physical weight, a mixture of pity, scorn, and grim fascination. Elara choked back a sob, her fingers digging into the half-frozen earth as another wave of forced metamorphosis racked her body. Her spine arched, vertebrae popping like a string of firecrackers. The sound of tearing fabric was drowned out by the rasp of coarse, gray fur erupting from her pores. It was a violation. A shift should be a run towards power, a surrender to the wild song. This was a punishment, a stripping bare. She resists her true nature. Luna Seraphina's cool, melodic voice cut through the grisly symphony of Elara's bones. Perhaps that is why the moon goddess withholds her blessing. Elara managed to lift her head, her vision swimming. Her wolf form was a pathetic, shuddering thing, smaller than any she-wolf's, her coat a dull gray instead of the rich browns and blacks of the pack, and through the pain she saw them. Kael, a mountain of a man and wolf, his arms crossed over his chest, his amber eyes devoid of the warmth they once held for her. Beside him, Seraphina, radiant and cruel, her hand resting possessively on his arm. The perfect Luna. The fertile Luna. The transformation reversed as abruptly as it began, bones snapping back with nauseating jerks, fur receding. Elara collapsed forward onto her hands, naked and trembling, her skin steaming in the cold air. The ceremonial robes, torn and muddy, were tossed at her feet by a beta. She fumbled to cover herself, the coarse wool scratching her sensitive skin. 3 years, Elara, Kael said, stepping forward. His boot landed inches from her fingers. The scent of him, frost, cedar, and absolute authority, made her wolf whimper inside. 3 years of empty cycles, 3 years of prayers and potions, and this, he gestured at her, at the evidence of her barrenness. The Moonfall line cannot end with me. The pack needs a future. I am your mate, Elara whispered, the words tasting of blood and defeat. The moon goddess bound us. The goddess gives and she takes away, Seraphina intoned, her sympathy a thin, poisonous veneer. A true mate bond would have borne fruit. Perhaps it was never complete. Perhaps it was a mistake. The words were a deeper wound than any physical blow. A murmur rippled through the pack. To question a mate bond was to question the very fabric of their world. Kael's jaw tightened. For a fleeting second, Elara saw a flicker in his eyes, not of love, but of a conflicted, furious pain. It was gone in an instant, replaced by flinty resolve. The needs of the pack come before the wants of the individual. You know our laws, Elara. She did, the law of the Barren. She had clung to a foolish hope that their bond, their history, would shield her. They had been children together, racing through these very woods. He had been the one to guide her through her first terrifying shift. He had whispered promises under a full moon, his mark on her neck a sacred vow. Now he was her judge. Elara of the Moonfall Pack, his voice boomed, formal and final, echoing off the ancient standing stones that ringed the clearing. You are found barren. The mate bond is hereby declared void. You are banished from our territory. By sunrise you must be gone. If you are found within our borders after that, you will be executed as a rogue. A collective inhale swept through the onlookers. Banishment was a death sentence. Rogues were hunted, despised, alone. Her wolf howled in despair, a sound only she could hear. Kael, please, she begged, the last of her dignity crumbling. He leaned down, his voice dropping so only she could hear. The forbidden attraction, the hunter's intensity, still simmered beneath his icy exterior. It made his rejection all the more horrifying. Run, Elara, run far and fast. And never speak my name again. He straightened, turning his back on her, the ultimate dismissal. Seraphina's smile was a sickle moon of triumph. 2 betas, Rylan and Jax, hauled Elara to her feet. They didn't meet her eyes as they dragged her, stumbling from the clearing, past the silent, staring faces of the pack she had loved, served, and failed. The sounds of the pack resuming its normal life murmurs, the crackle of torches, a distant laugh faded behind her as they marched her to the outskirts. At the border stream, the edge of Moonfall territory, they released her. Rylan, the older of the two, shoved a small, rough burlap sack into her hands. Food, a knife, don't come back. Jax, younger and avoiding her gaze, muttered, the Bloodfang pack ranges to the east. The Wraith woods to the north are unsettled. Go south. Maybe the humans won't smell the wolf on you. Then they were gone, melting back into the shadows of the trees, leaving her alone with the sighing wind and the gurgling, icy water. The full weight of it crashed down, banished, unmated, barren. The cold seeped through the thin robe, biting into her bones. her senses, heightened by the forced shift, were a torrent of overwhelming information. The scuttling of a vole under the frost, the distant howl of a true wolf, not one of her kind, just an animal, the oppressive, watchful silence of the ancient forest. She had nowhere to go. No family, they had died in a border skirmish with the Bloodfangs years ago. No allied packs. A lone she-wolf was either prey or a prize to be claimed. As she stood shivering, a new scent drifted on the wind. It was faint, corrupted old blood, rot, and a cloying, unnatural musk. It came from the north, from the direction of the Wraith Woods. A primal fear, deeper than her fear of Kael or banishment, coiled in her gut. Something was wrong in those woods, something was watching. Shaking, she turned south, following the stream. She walked for hours, her feet numb, her mind a hollow echo chamber of Kael's final words. The moon rose, that mocking sliver. Just before dawn, exhaustion forced her to stop in a small, rocky cave overlooking the stream. She chewed on a strip of tough, dried meat, the knife clutched in her hand. A sound froze her. Not the forest, not the water. It was a low, rhythmic thumping, like a massive, slow heartbeat, and it was coming from deep within the earth beneath her. Thump, 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 it vibrated up through the rock into the marrow of her bones. Her wolf, usually cowed and silent, raised its head inside her, not in fear, in recognition. A low, involuntary whine escaped her lips. As suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. Then a new scent, not the corruption from the north. This was different. It was immense, ancient, and carried the smoky, electric tang of a storm about to break. It was the scent of power so vast it made Alpha Kael's feel like a candle against the sun. And it was close. Elara scrambled to the mouth of the cave, her heart hammering against her ribs. The first rays of dawn were pinkening the sky. Below, in the mist curling off the stream, a figure stood. He was easily a head taller than Kael, his shoulders impossibly broad under a simple, dark, travel-worn tunic. His hair was the color of raven's wings, long and tied back. He wasn't looking at the cave. He was looking east towards the rising sun, his profile stark and severe, but he knew she was there. His presence was an anchor in the world, pulling at the very core of her being. He turned his head. His eyes were not amber or gold or any wolf-like hue. They were silver, pure liquid mercury, glowing with their own inner light in the dawn gloom. In them she saw galaxies and cold, unforgiving judgment. Her breath hitched, her wolf didn't whimper. It bowed, pressing itself against the confines of her soul in utter, terrified submission. The law of the Barren, the voided mate bond, the corruption in the Wraith Woods, the heartbeat in the earth. They were all forgotten in the face of this. The man, the Alpha, for he could be nothing else, took a single, deliberate step towards the cave. The distance between them seemed to shrink, the air crackling with a static charge. His scent washed over her, not just storm and power, but something else. Something that called to the empty, aching space inside her that Kael's rejection had left. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and quiet, yet it carried up to her as if he stood an inch away. It wasn't a question, it was a statement that sealed her fate. There you are. The world shrank to the silver eyes burning in the dawn gloom. Elara's breath hitched, a raw scrape in her throat. Her wolf, which had been a cowering, silent thing since the clearing, now screamed a single primal note inside her skull, Alpha. But not her Alpha, not Kael. This power was different. It was not the familiar, stern command of Moonfall, but something ancient, vast, and utterly terrifying. It felt less like a presence and more like a force of nature that had chosen to wear the shape of a wolf. The scent that rolled from him was of deep earth, of frost on high mountain peaks, and beneath it, a thread of something metallic and old, like lightning-struck stone. He didn't move, he simply stood at the mouth of her meager refuge, his massive head lowered slightly, those impossible eyes pinning her to the cold rock. He was enormous, his fur a mix of storm cloud gray and charcoal, tipped with silver that caught the weak light. He made Kael's powerful form seem almost adolescent in comparison. Run, the human part of her mind gibbered, but her wolf was locked in a submissive paralysis, belly to the ground, tail tucked so tightly it ached. She was already in the most vulnerable position possible. There was no deeper submission to offer. A low, rumbling sound emanated from him, not a growl, but a vibration that she felt in the marrow of her bones. It was a question, a demand, assessment, all in one. Please, Elara whispered, the word barely audible. I was just leaving, I meant no trespass. The wolf's head tilted, a curiously intelligent gesture. The silver eyes flicked from her face to the small, pathetic sack of supplies Rylan had given her, then back. The intelligence in that gaze was unnerving. It was not the feral cunning of a rogue, but the sharp, calculating awareness of a ruler. With a fluid, silent motion that defied his size, he shifted. The air crackled. It wasn't the soft, seamless shift of the Moonfall wolves. It was a sound of power being restrained, of a greater form compressing itself into a human shell. Where the giant wolf had stood, a man now loomed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clad in dark, simple clothing of leather and wool that spoke of function, not pack status. His hair was the same storm gray as his fur, swept back from a face that was all hard angles and weathered planes. He looked neither young nor old, but enduring. And his eyes, they were still that piercing, luminous silver, holding the same ancient weight. Elara scrambled back, her back pressing into the cold stone of the cave wall. She was human, naked, shivering, and utterly exposed before this stranger. She wrapped her arms around herself, a futile gesture. "You are far from your territory, little wolf." His voice was a deep baritone, smoother than she expected, but with the same bedrock power. It didn't echo, it absorbed the space around it. "I have no territory," she said, the truth ripped from her. "I am banished from Moonfall." Saying it aloud to this terrifying stranger made it freshly real, a new wound. Moonfall, he repeated the name, and a flicker of something recognition, disdain passed through his silver eyes. Kael's pack. He knew Kael, of course he did. Alphas knew of other alphas. Dread coiled tighter in her gut. Were they allies? Would he drag her back as a rogue trespasser for some diplomatic favor? "I was not told of a banishment," he mused, his gaze traveling over her again, not with lust but with a piercing scrutiny that felt more invasive. "A Luna cast out." "Unusual, I am not Luna," Elara said, the title a knife twist. "Not anymore." The bond was voided, for barrenness. The statement was flat, factual. He had smelled it on her, she realized. In her shifted form, the absence, the lack, was as clear as a scent mark to a wolf of his power. Shame, hot and corrosive, flooded her. She looked away, focusing on a crack in the stone floor. The sound of the stream below seemed suddenly very loud. "Look at me." It was not a request, it was an alpha command, pure and simple. Her head snapped up, her eyes meeting his against her will. The compulsion was different from Kael's. Kael's command had been like a leash. This was like a gravitational pull. "Your name," he said. "Elara." It was a whisper. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "I have been searching for a scent on the wind for 3 nights," he said, his tone shifting into something contemplative. "A scent of grief and moonfrost. I thought it a memory. It led me here." Confusion cut through her fear. "Searching for me? Why?" Instead of answering, he asked another question. "Where were you going, Elara?" "South," she said, repeating Jax's advice like a lifeline. "My former beta, said to go south, to avoid the Wraith Woods." A sharp, derisive breath escaped him. "Jax, the beta with the pitying eyes, his advice would have killed you within a week. The South is contested ground between 3 packs currently at war. A lone, unmated she-wolf would be a prize or a casualty long before she found sanctuary." The blunt prognosis stole the air from her lungs. Jax's pity had been a death sentence, Ryland's supplies a last meal. "Then where?" The question was a plea. The mysterious Alpha stepped fully into the cave, and the space seemed to diminish. He moved to her discarded sack, picking it up with 2 fingers as if it were a soiled thing. He opened it, glanced at the meager contents: dried meat, a water skin, a thin blanket, and let it drop. "You carry the stink of their fear and their failure," he said, his voice low. "Moonfall has grown weak. To discard a resource simply because it does not fit their narrow purpose, it is the thinking of a pack in decline. I am not a resource." Elara found a spark of defiance, fanned by his cold analysis of her tragedy. "I am a person. They discarded me." Those silver eyes locked onto hers, and the spark was smothered. "You are a wolf. You are either strong or you are prey. Moonfall has decided you are prey." He took a step closer, and the scent of him, earth, frost, ozone, filled her senses. "The question that remains is, are they correct?" Tears of frustration and terror welled in her eyes. She was so tired, so broken. "What do you want from me?" "My pack is not like Moonfall," he said, ignoring her question. "We do not live in fear of borders that shrink with every passing season. We do not sacrifice our own to the false god of tradition." He crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level, and the intensity of his gaze was almost unbearable. "My territory is the Shadowfen. It lies to the north." Elara's blood went cold. "North through the Wraith Woods. Through them and beyond," he confirmed. "The woods are my first line of defense. The corruption you sent is a warning to those who do not belong. It does not harm my wolves." "My wolves." The claim was absolute. "You are offering me sanctuary." She could scarcely believe the words. It was too sudden, too fraught with unknown perils. "I am stating a path," he corrected, standing once more. "You have 2 choices, Elara of Moonfall. You can take your sack and walk south into the wars of petty alphas and see how long your barrenness protects you from them. Or," he paused and the air grew heavier, "you can turn north. You can walk into the Wraith Woods." If you're strong enough to reach the other side, you will find my sentinels. If not, he left the consequence hanging, more terrifying for its silence. It was no choice at all. It was a test, a possibly fatal one. Why? She asked again, her voice trembling. Why would you do this? What am I to you? For the first time, his expression shifted, the impassive mask softened by a fraction, revealing a depth of something that looked like recognition. You are a scent on the wind that should not have been cast adrift, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a note of harmony in a song that has been silent for a very long time. That is all you need to know for now. He turned and walked to the cave entrance, his form silhouetted against the brightening gray sky. Dawn is here. The woods are closest in the full light of day. I suggest you move. He was leaving. He was going to abandon her here with this impossible decision. Wait, she cried out. What is your name? He glanced back over his shoulder, those silver eyes glowing in the dim cave. I am Lysander, Alpha of the Shadowfen. Remember the name if you survive the woods. And then, in a blur of motion and another crackle of dense air, he was gone. The massive gray wolf stood on the ledge outside for a heartbeat, gave her one last, unreadable look, and then leapt soundlessly into the trees below, disappearing as if he were a ghost. Elara was alone again, the cave suddenly feeling vast and empty without his overwhelming presence. The sounds of the forest returned, the chirp of birds, the rush of the stream, normal sounds, mocking sounds. She looked at the pathetic sack on the floor. South to be a prize in a war, or north into the corrupted heart of the Wraith Woods, on the word of a mysterious, terrifying Alpha who looked at her as if she were a puzzle he needed to solve. Her body ached, her soul felt shredded, but as she sat there, a strange thing happened. The cowering, submissive knot that was her wolf stirred. It didn't rise, but it turned its inward gaze toward the north. A faint, almost forgotten instinct whispered. It wasn't hope, it was something more primal, direction. With stiff, protesting limbs, Elara forced herself to stand. She pulled on her thin, discarded dress, the fabric offering no warmth. She picked up the sack of supplies, her fingers tightening on the coarse cloth. She walked to the mouth of the cave. To the south, the land rolled away, sun-dappled and deceptively peaceful. To the north, a dense, dark line of trees awaited. The canopy was unnaturally thick, and even from here she could catch the faint, rotten musk on the breeze, the Wraith Woods. She took a deep, shuddering breath. She was Elara of no one, banished, barren, prey, but prey could run, and she was done running from what she was. With a resolve that felt fragile as ice, she stepped out of the cave. She did not look south. She turned her face toward the looming darkness, toward the scent of corruption, toward the path that might lead to a place called Shadowfen. She took one step, then another. The trees swallowed the light ahead. Behind her, unseen, from a high rocky outcrop, a pair of silver eyes watched her go. A low, approving rumble vibrated in Lysander's chest. She had chosen the woods. The first test was passed. Now the real trial would begin. The shadows between the ancient trees seemed to deepen, reaching for her as she crossed the final stretch of open ground. A branch, brittle and black, snapped in the depths of the forest. Crack, it sounded like a bone breaking. Elara froze at the very edge of the tree line. The scent of old blood and damp rot was overpowering now, a physical wall of foulness. The sunlight did not penetrate more than a few feet into the wood. Beyond that was a twilight gloom, thick and swirling with mist that clung to the gnarled roots. Another sound, a wet, dragging shuffle, echoed from the mist to her left. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But there was no back, there was only forward into the wading gloom. She clenched her jaw, tightened her grip on her sack, and stepped across the threshold. The temperature dropped instantly. The light died. The sounds of the normal forest vanished, replaced by a dense, oppressive silence, broken only by the drip of moisture and the creak of twisting wood. The path behind her was already obscured by mist and shadow. She was in. A twig snapped directly behind her, too close. Elara whirled around, but saw only shifting, formless gray. The dragging sound came again, now to her right, circling. She was not alone in the woods, and the things that shared the gloom with her were not wolves. The air in the Wraith Woods was not merely cold. It was a physical presence, thick and cloying, carrying the scent of turned earth, rust, and something deeply, unsettlingly musky. It coated Elara's tongue, a taste of decay that made her want to gag. The light that filtered through the dense, twisted canopy was a sickly green-gray, casting no true shadows but instead bathing everything in a uniform, gloomy twilight. Silence, profound and heavy, pressed against her ears, a silence that was not an absence of sound, but a suppression of it. And then came the dragging, shh thump, shh thump. It was a wet, grinding sound, like something heavy being pulled through mud and over roots. It came from her left. Then, a moment later, a similar sound echoed from directly ahead. Then her right, they were circling. Not with the swift, predatory grace of wolves, but with a slow, inexorable patience that was far worse. Her own wolf, a cowed and trembling thing inside her, pressed flat against her psyche, radiating pure, undiluted terror. It wasn't the fear of a fight. It was the fear of the utterly unknown, of a corruption that violated the natural order. Elara forced her frozen limbs to move. Lysander had said north, always north. She fixed her gaze on a grotesque, lightning-blasted oak that leaned at a severe angle and started walking, her worn boots sinking slightly into the spongy, moss-covered ground. Every rustle of her own sack against her back sounded like a thunderclap. Shh thump, closer. She dared not look, her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A low, guttural whisper, devoid of any intelligible language but brimming with malice, seeped from the undergrowth to her right. It wasn't heard with her ears, it seemed to form directly inside her skull. She stumbled, a whimper escaping her throat before she could choke it back. Weak, you are weak, barren, broken. The thoughts came in Kael's voice, but they were laced with the wood's own rotting essence. She saw Seraphina's triumphant smile in the dappled, diseased light. The memory of the ceremonial clearing, the cold mud, the finality in Kael's eyes, it all rose up, a tidal wave of despair threatening to drown her where she stood. This was her fate. To be judged and found wanting over and over until death took her. Shh thump, right behind her. She spun, a cry tearing from her lips. Nothing, only the dense, great-trunked trees and hanging veils of moss. But the ground where the sound had originated was disturbed. The thick moss was torn, and beneath it, the soil was black and wet, as if bleeding. No, she breathed the word swallowed by the oppressive air. This was not the clean death of a rival wolf's fang. This was consumption, erasure. A new sound cut through the dragging, a high, chittering laugh from above. She looked up. Among the tangled branches, a shape dark and spindly skittered sideways like a spider. It had too many joints. It did not look down, but she felt its attention like a physical weight. Run, she had to run. Her wolf in its terror finally gave her one clear instinct. Move. Now, Elara ran. She crashed through ferns that felt like grasping hands, vaulted over fallen logs slick with phosphorescent fungus, her breath sobbing in her throat. The dragging sounds immediately quickened, keeping pace with her, a horrifying perimeter of noise. The chittering multiplied, following her through the canopy. The corrupt scent intensified, filling her nose, her lungs, making her head swim. She ran until a stitch like a knife blade lanced her side, until her legs burned with fatigue. She staggered to a halt, bracing herself against a tree. The bark was unnaturally soft, giving under her palm like rotten fruit. She snatched her hand back, wiping it frantically on her trousers. Silence descended again, the dragging had stopped. The chittering ceased, this was worse. Panting, she looked around. Every direction looked the same, endless trees, gloom, moss. She had lost all sense of direction. The blasted oak was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She was lost, truly, utterly lost. North, she whispered to herself, a desperate mantra. Find north. But how? The canopy blotted out the sun, the sky. There were no moss patterns on the trees. The growth was uniform, a suffocating sameness. She was trapped in a living, breathing maze that wanted her soul. A soft, wet crunch sounded to her left, then a sniffing sound, deep and resonant, as if from a large muzzle. But it was wrong. It was hollow, like wind through a rotten log. Elara froze, not even daring to breathe. From between two closely grown trunks, a shape emerged. It was wolf-like in only the most basic skeletal sense. It stood on 4 legs, but they were elongated, ending not in paws but in bony, grasping appendages that dug into the soft earth. Its pelt was not fur, but a matted, stringy substance like dead lichen, hanging in clumps over a frame too thin, ribs starkly visible. Its head was the worst. It had a snout, but the skin was pulled tight over the skull, eye sockets deep, black, and empty. No eyes gleamed within, yet it was looking at her. It opened its mouth, and a long, gray, worm-like tongue lolled out, dripping black saliva that sizzled where it hit the moss. A whine high and pathetic built in Elara's own chest. This was the wood's inhabitant. This was what made the scent. The creature took a step forward, its head tilting with a sickening crack of bone. It sniffed the air again, directly toward her. It did not growl, it made a low, eager mewling sound. Her wolf, in its absolute terror, did something then. It didn't rise to fight, it couldn't. Instead, it did the only thing it had left, it submitted. It threw the sensation of utter, hopeless surrender outward, a wave of psychic vulnerability. The creature paused, its head tilted the other way. The mewling softened, tinged with what sounded like confusion. And in that split second of hesitation, a memory flashed in Elara's mind, not of Kael or the pack, but of Lysander, his silver eyes like moonlit ice, the absolute, unshakable authority in his voice. The way her wolf had reacted to him, not with this soul-crushing terror, but with a recognition that bypassed thought. He was Alpha, true, ancient Alpha, and he had set this test. He had not sent her here to die, not like this. He had sent her here to prove something. No, she said again, but this time the word had force. It was not a plea, it was a refusal. She refused to be erased by this rotting phantom. She straightened her spine, pushing away from the tree. She looked past the emaciated creature into the deeper woods. I am going north, she stated, her voice trembling but clear. My Alpha waits for me at Shadowfen. The word Alpha seemed to hang in the corrupt air. It had power here. The creature recoiled a fraction, a hiss escaping its ragged maw. It was not a hiss of anger, but of recognition, distaste. Elara took a step, not away from the creature, but perpendicular to it, choosing a path that felt, in some deep, instinctual way, less wrong. The creature tracked her movement, but did not follow. It simply watched with its empty sockets, the mewling dying to a faint, reedy whisper. She walked, every nerve screaming, expecting the dragging to resume, the attack to come. It did not. The woods were still watchful, still hostile, but the immediate, pressing menace had receded. Her act of defiance, her invocation of Lysander's title, had created a fragile bubble of space. She walked for what felt like hours, time losing all meaning. The landscape began to change subtly. The trees grew even larger, their trunks thicker, their bark hardening into a familiar, rough texture. The moss underfoot became less uniform, and here and there she saw a normal fern, a healthy cluster of mushrooms. The corrupt scent was still present, but it was a background note now, not the overwhelming symphony. And then she heard it. Water, not the sluggish trickle of a bog, but the clear, musical rush of a stream. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She followed it, her pace quickening, the promise of something clean cutting through the wood's despair. She broke through a final wall of thorny brush and stumbled into a small clearing. A swift, narrow stream cut through it, its water crystal clear and sparkling, where a shaft of actual, golden sunlight pierced the canopy and struck its surface. The air here was clean, sharp, with the scent of pine and cold stone. The corruption was gone. Elara fell to her knees at the stream's edge, plunging her hands into the water. It was icy, shocking, and perfect. She drank greedily, the cold clearing the foul taste from her mouth. She splashed her face, gasping as the water ran down her neck. She had found a sanctuary within the trial. As she sat back on her heels, wiping her face, she saw it. On the opposite bank, nestled against the base of a massive, healthy pine, was a small structure. It was a lean-to, expertly crafted from lashed branches and layered pine boughs. Before it, the ashes of an old fire lay in a ring of stones. This was not a natural formation. This was made. Someone or something had stayed here. Cautiously, she crossed the stream, hopping from stone to stone. She approached the lean-to. Inside, on a bed of dried moss, was a neatly folded gray pelt wolf, but from a massive animal. Beside it lay a flint and steel and a simple bone-handled knife, a gift or a checkpoint. Her heart thudded with a new, confused emotion. This was not the work of the dragging creatures. This was deliberate, almost caring. Had Lysander left this, was he watching even now? A deep, resonant howl suddenly echoed through the woods, seeming to come from all directions at once. It was not the chilling, empty sound of the creature. This was a wolf's howl, rich with power and purpose. It was a call, a summons, and it was answered. From the north, beyond the stream, another howl rose, then another and another, a chorus of strong, healthy wolves. The sound was distant, but it vibrated through the clean air of the clearing, through the very ground beneath her feet. It was the sound of a pack, a powerful, numerous pack, Shadowfen. The howls did not fade. They held a sustained, beautiful note that seemed to push back the gloom of the Wraith Woods, asserting dominion. The message was clear: you are closer. You have passed the heart of the trial, but you are not safe yet. Elara looked at the supplies in the lean-to, then back into the dark woods behind her. The dragging had begun again, faint but persistent, back the way she had come. They would not cross the stream. This clearing, this stream, was a boundary. She had a choice again: stay in this temporary sanctuary or follow the howls to their source. Picking up the bone knife, its cool weight solid and reassuring in her hand, she looked north. The golden shaft of sunlight had moved, now illuminating a distinct animal trail leading away from the stream, deeper into the thinning, healthier woods. The Alpha's call still hung in the air. She slipped the knife into her belt, took the flint and steel, and left the pelt. She would not rest yet. She stepped onto the trail, and from a high ridge, shrouded in the mist that began to curl through the taller pines, a pair of silver eyes watched her every step. Lysander's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. She had used her will, she had invoked his authority, she had found the waypoint. But the final stretch of the Wraith Woods was not guarded by mindless horrors. It was patrolled by his own border sentries, and they had their orders to test the mettle of the strange, broken she-wolf their alpha had taken such a personal interest in. The howl had been both a guide and a signal. As Elara walked the path, three massive, sleek-furred wolves, each larger than any in Moonfall, melted from the trees ahead, their eyes glowing like amber coals in the gathering mist. They did not snarl. They did not advance. They simply stood, blocking the trail, a living, breathing wall of muscle and silent judgment. The cliffhanger, the trial was not over. The final test stood before her, and these were no corrupted phantoms. These were Lysander's wolves. The three wolves were statues carved from shadow and threat. They stood shoulder to shoulder across the narrow animal trail, a living wall of muscle, fang, and intent. Their amber eyes glowed with an unnerving, intelligent light, fixed on Elara with the stillness of predators who have already cornered their prey. The air, which had begun to smell of pine and clean earth, now carried the sharp, aggressive scent of dominant wolves, oil, iron, and cold stone. Elara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The bone knife in her hand felt absurdly small, a toothpick against a tidal wave. Instinct screamed at her to run, but where? Back into the grasping, chittering gloom of the Wraith Woods. That was death. Forward was a different kind of death, swift and brutal. Her own wolf, which had been a cowering, silent thing since her banishment, did not whimper. Instead, it pressed against the inside of her skin, a low, submissive rumble vibrating in her chest. It recognized power here, a different order of magnitude than Kael's. This was not the posturing of a pack defending shrinking borders. This was the calm, absolute authority of wolves who knew their strength. Submit, her wolf instinct whispered, show throat, but the human part of her, the part that had walked across an icy stream and faced a creature of rot, clung to the memory of the supplied lean-to, the clean water, the guiding howl. Lysander had led her here. This was a test. It had to be. She slowly, carefully lowered the bone knife to her side, not dropping it, but making it non-threatening. She forced her trembling legs to take one step forward. The center wolf, a massive brute with a charcoal pelt and a scar across his muzzle, peeled his lips back in a soundless snarl. The warning was clear, come no further. Elara stopped. She swallowed, her throat dry. I am Elara, she said, her voice a ragged scrape in the silent woods. I answer the call of Shadowfen. I seek Alpha Lysander. The wolves did not move. Their glowing eyes assessed her, stripping her bare. She knew what they saw, a she-wolf in torn, muddy clothes, skin pale with exhaustion and fear, reeking of despair, moonfall, and the faint, clinging corruption of the woods. She was a beggar at their gate. The wolf on the left, a sleek female with silver-tipped fur, chuffed softly, a dismissive sound. The message was clear. You are nothing. You are less than nothing. Shame, hot and familiar, washed through Elara. This was the judgment of Moonfall all over again, reflected in the eyes of strangers. She was barren, weak, unwanted. Her shoulders began to slump. A sharp, discordant memory cut through the shame. Seraphina's triumphant smile in the torchlight. Kael's averted gaze, the icy water soaking her boots. No, a spark ignited in her chest, fanned by the cold air of the north and the sheer, stubborn will to have walked this far. She was not nothing. She had survived the clearing, the stream, the woods. She had invoked an alpha's name and lived. She lifted her chin, meeting the scarred wolf's amber gaze. Alpha Lysander left supplies for me, she said, her voice gaining a thread of strength. He led me here. I have passed through his woods. Will you now block the path he opened? She gestured weakly behind her, down the trail. Or is the famed strength of Shadowfen used to intimidate a single, banished she-wolf? For a long, tense moment, there was only the sound of the wind sighing through the pines. Then the three wolves shifted. It was not an attack. In a fluid, synchronized movement, they parted. The scarred male and the silver-tipped female moved to opposite sides of the trail, leaving a narrow gap between them. The third wolf, a younger male with reddish fur, remained directly ahead, but he lowered his head slightly, his eyes now fixed on a point past her shoulder. The path was open, but it was a gauntlet. To pass, she would have to walk between two dominant, hostile wolves, close enough to feel their body heat, to smell their aggression. It was another test of nerve rather than force. Elara's legs felt like water. She clutched the sack of meager supplies and the bone knife, took a deep breath that did nothing to calm her, and walked forward. Each step was agony. The scent of them was overwhelming, wild, untamed, and fiercely territorial. As she passed the scarred male, she heard the faint grind of his teeth. The silver-tipped female's breath huffed against her arm. Elara kept her eyes forward on the red-furred wolf who was now her guide. She walked with a slow, deliberate pace, refusing to hurry, refusing to cower. The submission her wolf offered was not one of fear, but of acknowledgement to a higher power. She passed through, the wolves fell into step behind her, a silent, intimidating escort. The red-furred wolf turned and began to lope up the trail at an easy pace, glancing back to ensure she followed. The forest changed rapidly. The oppressive, twisted trees of the Wraithwoods gave way completely to tall, straight pines and ancient, broadleaf trees. The ground was soft with millennia of fallen needles and leaves, muffling all sound. Sunlight, real and warm, dappled the forest floor. The air lost the last trace of corruption, replaced by the rich smells of loam, sap, and distant water. They walked for what felt like an hour. Elara's exhausted body screamed in protest, but she dared not fall behind. Just as she thought her legs would give out, the trees thinned abruptly. They emerged onto a high, rocky ridge overlooking a vast, breathtaking territory. Below them, cradled by mountains and dark, dense forest, lay a sprawling fenland. Silver threads of rivers and streams wound through black water and emerald-green moss. She could see the dark shapes of large, sturdy lodges built among the trees and on rocky outcrops, smoke curling from their chimneys. The scale was immense, wild, and powerful. This was Shadowfen. On the ridge before her, standing with his back to the view, was Lysander. He was in human form, dressed in simple, dark trousers and a tunic that did nothing to diminish his imposing presence. The wind tugged at his black hair. His silver eyes were like chips of glacier ice, fixed on her as she stumbled to a halt, her escorts melting away into the tree line. He was even more intimidating up close. Power radiated from him in a palpable wave, an ancient, deep-rooted strength that made the air itself feel heavier. Elara's wolf vanished completely, sinking into a profound, instinctual stillness. She dropped her gaze, unable to hold his. "You made it," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder over the fen. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, devoid of warmth or congratulation. Elara nodded, finding her voice. You left the supplies." "The clearings, thank you." "The woods test the spirit, the centuries test the will," he stated, as if explaining a simple natural law. "A wolf that cannot pass either has no place here." He took a step toward her. She flinched, a tiny, involuntary movement she instantly hated herself for. He noted it, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You invoked my authority to face the corruption. You used your wits, not just your fear. And you walked the gauntlet without running. These are not the actions of the broken creature Moonfall cast out." He was circling her now, a slow, predatory assessment. "Look at me, Elara." She forced her head up, meeting his silver gaze. It was like staring into a blizzard, beautiful, terrifying, and utterly consuming. "Moonfall is a dying pack," he said, his tone dismissive. "They cling to old, brittle laws and sacrifice their own strength out of fear. They saw barrenness and cast away a she-wolf with a spine of steel. They are fools," he stopped in front of her. "But their loss is not automatically my gain. Why should Shadowfen shelter you?" The question hung in the air. Elara's mind raced. She had nothing to offer. No strength, no family, no gift. "I have nothing," she whispered, the truth tearing from her. "No skills worth mentioning, no lineage, no pups. I can offer only myself, what is left of me, and my loyalty if it is earned." Lysander studied her for a long, silent moment. "Loyalty is a start, but Shadowfen does not run on sentiment." He gestured toward the vast fen below. "We are not at war with our neighbors because our neighbors understand the cost of crossing us. We do not fear the Wraithwoods, we use them. Every wolf here serves a purpose. What is yours?" Before she could formulate a desperate answer, a new sound cut through the wind, the distinct, rhythmic thump of a drum coming from the largest lodge visible below. It was a slow, solemn beat that resonated in Elara's bones. Lysander's head snapped toward the sound, his expression shifting from analytical intensity to sharp focus. A complex emotion flickered in his eyes: concern, resolve, urgency. "The purpose may have found you first," he said, his voice now edged with a new tension. "Come." He turned and began striding down a steep, winding path off the ridge without a backward glance. It was an order. Elara hurried after him, her body protesting every jarring step downward. The drumbeat grew louder, more insistent, as they entered the heart of the settlement. The lodges were built of massive logs and stone, functional and strong. Shadowfen wolves watched their descent. Their gazes were curious, assessing, but not openly hostile like the sentries. They nodded respectfully to Lysander, their eyes lingering on Elara with undisguised interest. She smelled cooking meat, herbs, wood smoke, and the potent, healthy scent of a large, thriving pack. They arrived at the central lodge. Two stern-faced warriors flanked the entrance. They pulled the heavy doors open, and the drumbeat swelled, now mixed with the low murmur of many voices and a scent that made Elara's stomach clench, the coppery tang of blood and the sour smell of sickness. Inside, the lodge was vast, lit by a central fire and torches along the walls. Dozens of shadowfen wolves were gathered, their faces grim. In the center of the space, on a thick pile of furs, lay a young she-wolf. Her skin was slick with sweat, her face contorted in pain. A senior she-wolf, a healer by the smell of herbs on her hands, knelt beside her, pressing a cloth to the girl's abdomen, which was dark with blood. "The bleeding will not stop, Alpha," the healer said, her voice strained. "The wound is deep. It was a bloodfang blade tainted. Our magic slows the poison, but it cannot close the wound." Her strength fades. Lysander moved to the girl's side, his presence causing the crowd to part. He placed a hand on her forehead, his face a mask of controlled fury. "A border skirmish. They grow bold," he growled to no one in particular. He looked at the healer. "Use the last of the moon-blessed silverweed." "We tried, Alpha. It is not enough. The corruption in the wound fights the healing." Elara stood just inside the doorway, forgotten, watching the life seep from the young wolf. The drumbeat was a funeral march. The girl's pain was a palpable thing in the air, a sharp, desperate scent that mixed with the despair of her packmates. It was a scene of helplessness, a pack facing a loss despite its strength. Something stirred within Elara, a memory not her own but deeper, an instinct buried so deep she'd thought it extinct. Her nostrils flared. Beneath the blood and poison, she caught the specific fading scent of the girl's life force and the peculiar, oily signature of the taint attacking it. Her eyes, unbidden, traced the path of the injury as if she could see beneath the skin. Without thinking, she took a step forward. The bone knife was still in her hand. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear in the hushed lodge. "The silverweed, it's applied to the wound." All eyes turned to her. The healer glared, her patience thin. "Yes, to draw the poison, it is not working." Elara took another step, driven by the strange, pulling certainty. "It's drawing from the wrong place. The taint, it moves, like roots. It's anchored deeper near the bone. You're treating the branches, not the root." She didn't know how she knew this. The words simply came, rising from a dark, silent well inside her. Lysander's silver eyes locked onto her. "Speak plainly." Elara met his gaze, the urgency of the moment overriding her fear. "The herb needs to be inserted into the point of anchorage, to burn the root out, then the wound can close." She held up the bone knife. "A cut, here." She pointed to a spot on her own hip, far from the visible wound on the girl's abdomen. The healer scoffed. "You would have me cut a dying girl on the word of a moonfall stray? You know nothing of our ways." "Enough." Lysander's voice cut through the tension. He looked from the dying girl to Elara, his gaze piercing. The drumbeat throbbed. The girl moaned, a weak, heartbreaking sound. He made a decision. "Do it," he commanded Elara. Shock rippled through the room. Elara's own breath caught. "Alpha, I've never, you saw it." "You named it," he said, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "Now prove it, or her death is on your hands as well as Bloodfang's." The weight of the choice crushed her. This was not a test of survival, but of a truth she did not understand. Hands shaking, she moved to the healer's side. The older woman bristled, but at a sharp look from Lysander, handed her a small pouch of pungent, silvery leaves. Elara's mind went blank, then crystal clear. The sounds of the lodge faded, the drum, the whispers, the crackle of the fire. All she could sense was the wound, the taint, the fading pulse of life. It was a map written in scent and pain. She took the bone knife. "I need fire," she whispered. A torch was brought. She passed the blade through the flames, her hands steadied. She looked at the healer. "Hold her." With a precision that felt both alien and intimately familiar, she pressed her fingers against the girl's hip, found the specific cold knot under the skin where the corruption had settled, and made a small, swift incision. Dark, almost black blood welled up. Ignoring the gasps around her, she took a pinch of the silverweed, rolled it, and pressed it into the shallow cut. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the girl on the furs arched her back, a strangled cry escaping her lips. A thin, dark vapor, smelling of rot and iron, hissed from the main abdominal wound. The blood flowing from it changed from black to a bright, clean red. The healer, her eyes wide, immediately pressed her cloth back onto the abdomen. This time the bleeding slowed, then stopped. The drumbeat ceased. The girl's body went limp, but her breathing, while weak, was even. The terrible scent of death receded, replaced by the clean scent of healing and exhaustion. A stunned silence filled the lodge. Every eye was on Elara, covered in blood, the bone knife hanging loosely in her hand. Lysander stared at her, his silver eyes blazing with a fierce, triumphant light. He saw not a barren exile, but a she-wolf who had just performed an act of healing so instinctual, so precise, that no trained healer in his pack had perceived it. "You see a wolf with no purpose, Elara of Moonfall," he said, his voice resonating in the quiet. I see a seer, a wound reader, a talent so rare it has become myth. He took a step toward her, the energy around him shifting from territorial alpha to something more possessive, more intense. Moonfall did not banish a barren she-wolf. They cast out a treasure and called it trash. Before Elara could process his words, before she could understand what she had just done, the doors of the lodge burst open. A winded scout stumbled in, his eyes wild. Alpha, patrol from the southern ridge. They've intercepted a messenger from Moonfall. The scout's gaze swept the room and landed on Elara, covered in the blood of a shadowfen wolf. His voice dropped to a horrified whisper. The message is for you, Alpha. Moonfall's Luna, Seraphina, she is with Pup. And Alpha Kael, he demands the immediate return of his banished mate, Elara. He claims she is pack property and her knowledge of their borders is a threat. He threatens war if she is not surrendered. The silence in the lodge turned to ice. Lysander's head slowly turned from the scout to Elara. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, but it never reached his eyes, which had gone cold as the heart of winter. Does he now? Lysander purred, the sound vibrating with lethal promise. He looked at Elara, her blood-stained hands, her stunned face. It seems your former mate has just made his choice. And he could not have chosen worse. The cliffhanger hangs on Lysander's reaction and the impending confrontation with Moonfall. The silence in the central lodge was absolute, a physical weight pressing down on the packed earth floor. The scent of blood, herbs, and fear was abruptly overpowered by the ozone crackle of Alpha Lysander's fury. It rolled off him in a wave, so potent Elara's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the healing pallet, her hands still tingling from the strange, instinctive act that had saved the young she-wolf. Lysander did not roar. The sound that tore from his chest was lower, more lethal, a deep, vibrating growl that seemed to resonate in the very bones of the lodge. The torches flickered, their flames bending toward him as if in supplication. His silver eyes, fixed on the panting scout, were no longer merely ancient. They were glacial, the eyes of a predator who had just been profoundly insulted. He demands, Lysander's voice was a blade of winter air. Kael of the shrinking, fearful Moonfall, demands. The scout, a lean male with a dusty pelt, flattened his ears completely, his tail tucked so tightly it vanished. His words, Alpha, delivered by his beta, Rylan, at the southern edge of the Wraith Woods. They will not cross the scent line. They wait for a response. Elara's breath hitched. Rylan, the beta who had handed her the sack, his face a mask of duty, had now become Kael's herald. The world tilted. Seraphina was pregnant. The one thing Elara could not give Kael, the very reason she wore the brand of Barrenness, was now the catalyst for this new horror. They didn't want her back out of remorse. They wanted her as property, a tool, a slave to their new, perfect family. The humiliation was a fresh, searing brand over the old one. Lysander's gaze sliced from the scout to Elara. The possessive, calculating look he'd given her moments before had hardened into something strategic, warlike. You see the measure of your former alpha, he stated, his voice carrying to every wolf in the lodge. He discards a treasure because he lacks the wit to recognize it. Then, when another finds value in it, he claims ownership out of petty pride and newfound potency. The last word was a sneer. The shadowfen healer, who had been glaring at Elara with open hostility, now looked between her alpha and the broken she-wolf with dawning, uncomfortable confusion. The pack members gathered around murmured, their eyes on Elara now holding not just curiosity, but a spark of defensive anger. The insult to their alpha was an insult to them all. What is your response, Alpha? Asked the scarred sentry who had tested Elara on the trail. His voice was gravel, his posture ready for violence. Lysander finally moved. He walked to the lodge's great wooden doors and pushed them open. The damp, green-scented air of the fen rushed in, diluting the lodge's intense atmosphere. He stood silhouetted against the gray twilight sky. My response, he said, his voice now carrying out into the settlement, will be delivered in person. He turned back, his eyes finding Elara. You will come, you will stand beside me. You will see what it means when an alpha does not hide behind borders and ultimatums, but defends what is his. It was not a request, it was a command, and it thrummed through the mate bond that wasn't, that strange, submissive connection her wolf had to him. She had no choice. More than that, a fierce, desperate part of her wanted to see. She wanted to see Kael's face when he realized the broken thing he'd thrown away was not cowering, but standing at the right hand of an alpha who made him look like a pup. Jax, she whispered, the memory of the beta's pitying advice striking her. He told me to go south. You said it was a death sentence. It was, Lysander said, stepping close to her. He towered over her, his scent of frost and deep earth enveloping her. But his pity was as useless as his alpha's pride. The southern packs are tearing each other apart for scraps. Moonfall's weakness invites predators. They look for easy prey. his silver eyes bored into hers. You are not easy prey, not anymore, remember that. He strode out of the lodge. The message was clear, follow. The journey back through the northern reaches of the Wraith Woods was a blur of shadows and tension. Lysander led, a massive, silent figure moving with preternatural grace. Elara followed, her legs aching but driven by a surge of adrenaline. Flanking them were the three border sentries, the scarred male, the silver-tipped female, and the red-furred male, their amber eyes scanning the deepening gloom. The corrupt scent of the woods was present, but it parted before Lysander like mist before the sun. Once a dragging sound echoed to their left, followed by a wet chitter. Lysander didn't even turn his head. He simply released a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the soil. The sound ceased instantly. Elara's mind raced, pack property. The words echoed, ugly and dehumanizing. In Moonfall, she had been a failed Luna. Here she was what? A foundling, a seer, a political pawn? Lysander's words defends what is his echoed just as loudly. Did he mean his territory, his authority, or did he in some way mean her? They reached the edge of the Wraith Woods as the last light of day bled from the sky. Before them lay the rocky, stream-divided borderland, now shrouded in deep twilight. Across the narrow, rushing stream, torches flickered. Moonfall warriors, perhaps a dozen, stood in a tense line. At their center, flanked by Beta's Rylan and Jax, stood Alpha Kael. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs. Seeing him was a physical blow. He looked the same, powerful, regal, his dark hair swept back, his alpha aura a familiar mantle of authority. But his face was harder, the lines around his mouth deeper. And beside him, though not physically present, Elara could almost smell Seraphina's triumphant influence. Lysander stepped out of the tree line and the very air changed. The Moonfall wolves shifted uneasily, their torches guttered. Kael's posture stiffened, his own aura flaring in response, but it seemed smaller somehow against the vast, ancient presence of the Shadowfen Alpha. Elara hung back, shrouded in the wood's shadows as Lysander had instructed. She watched, her breath fogging in the chill air. Lysander, Kael called across the water, his voice striving for alpha-to-alpha equality and falling short. You have my message. Surrender the she-wolf, Elara. She is Moonfall's by law and by blood. Her banishment did not sever pack ownership, only residency. Lysander didn't raise his voice. It carried anyway, cold and clear. Your laws are the whimperings of a dying pack, Kael. You cast out a jewel and call it trash. I found it. It is mine. The finality in that word, mine, sent a shiver through both lines of wolves. Kael's jaw tightened. She is barren, useless to a pack's future, but she is still our responsibility. My Luna wishes for her to return. The mention of Seraphina's wish was a misstep. It revealed the true source of the demand. Your Luna's wishes are of no concern to me, Lysander dismissed. You come to my border, you scent my woods, and you make demands. You mistake my territory for your own clearing. Beta Rylan took a half step forward, his face grim. Alpha Lysander, we seek to avoid conflict, but the she-wolf is a member of our pack. Her place is with us. Her place, Lysander said, his voice dropping into a deadly quiet, is where she chooses to stand. Let her speak for herself. All eyes turned toward the dark tree line. Elara's blood turned to ice. This was the moment. The sentry behind her, the scarred male, gave a low, almost imperceptible grunt. It wasn't kindness. It was an order from his alpha relayed through him. She stepped forward. The sound of her feet on the rocky ground seemed deafening. She moved from the shadow of the pines into the open space beside Lysander, keeping the rushing stream between her and her past. The torchlight fell on her, and she heard the sharp intake of breath from the Moonfall line. She knew what they saw, not the neatly groomed, subdued Luna they had banished, wrapped in a fine dress. They saw a creature clad in a rough gray wolf pelt, her hair tangled, her face smudged with dirt and dried blood from the healing, her eyes holding a hollowed-out exhaustion but also a flicker of something new, a stubborn, unbroken ember. She stood not in submission, but beside a legend. Kael's eyes widened. His gaze swept over her, from her feet to her face, and a complex storm of emotions brewed in his eyes, shock, a fleeting, painful recognition, and then hardening resolve. Jax looked down at his feet, his earlier pity now seeming like shame. Rylan's expression remained unreadable, the perfect beta. Elara, Kael said, and her name on his lips was a stranger's sound. Come home, this posturing is unnecessary. Your place is with your pack. Her voice, when it came, was rough from disuse and the woods cold, but it didn't tremble. You declared I had no place. You severed the bond. You cast me out at Seraphina's bidding. I was barren and therefore nothing. She took a shaky breath, feeling Lysander's silent, powerful presence beside her like a fortress wall. I am not nothing. You are causing a war for your pride, Kael snapped, his composure cracking. No, Lysander interjected, the word final. You are causing a war for yours and your pregnant Lunas. You fear a barren she-wolf under my protection is a challenge to your legitimacy, a reminder of your failure. You are correct. It is, Kael's wolf surged forward in his eyes, a flash of gold. She is pack property. Then fight for her, Lysander challenged, his voice rising for the first time, a clarion call that echoed off the stones. Cross this stream. Try to take her, let your warriors test my border and my patience. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. The stream's rush filled the void. Kael looked at his betas, at his warriors. He looked at the Shadowfen sentries whose glowing amber eyes promised violence. He looked at Lysander, an immovable mountain. He looked at Elara, who did not look away. He would not cross. Elara saw the calculation in his eyes. A skirmish here on Shadowfen's cursed border against an alpha of mythic power was not a fight he could win. It was a fight that would shatter Moonfall's remaining strength. Seraphina's pregnancy was a hope for the future. This would be a guaranteed end. This is not over, Kael said, the words hollow, a retreat masquerading as a threat. Harboring a wolf from another pack is an act of aggression. The other packs will hear of this. Let them, Lysander said, turning slightly as if the conversation was already concluded. They know better than to test me. You, it seems, need a reminder. He glanced at Elara. Come. As Elara turned to follow him back into the dark embrace of the Wraith Woods, she cast one last look over her shoulder. Kael was staring at her, his face a mask of furious, impotent pride. But it was Jax she locked eyes with for a fleeting second. His expression was no longer pitying. It was haunted, as if he was seeing a ghost or a prophecy he wished he hadn't. Then the shadows of the trees swallowed her, and the moonfall torches became mere pinpricks of light in the distance, soon obscured by the twisting trunks and the ever-present, corrupt scent. They walked in silence for a long time, the sentries melting away to patrol the borders. Finally, Lysander spoke, his voice a rumble in the dark. You stood, you spoke, that was the final test. Elara was exhausted to her marrow. What happens now, he said, stopping to look down at her. In the near-total darkness, his silver eyes gleamed like captured moonlight. Now, Kael's pride is wounded. He will not attack Shadowfen directly. He is not a fool. But he will seek other ways, alliances, perhaps with the southern packs or even with Bloodfang to bolster his strength and surround us. The game has shifted. Game, the word tasted bitter. Power is always a game, little wolf. The pieces are land, resources, and wolves. His gaze was heavy upon her. You are now a prized piece, a seer, a symbol of his failure and my gain. He will want you back or he will want you dead. A cold that had nothing to do with the night seeped into her bones. Why protect me? Truly, is it just to spite him? Lysander began walking again. No. I protect what is mine because it has value. You saw the corruption in that wound. You can see what others cannot. That is a weapon and a shield. Moonfall, in its fear, tried to discard a blade because they feared the hilt. I will wield the blade. They emerged from the Wraith Woods near the northern ridge. The Shadowfen settlement below was dotted with the warm, welcoming glow of hearth fires, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness at her back. You will train, Lysander stated as they descended. You will learn to use this site. My healer will instruct you in herbs, but your gift, you must learn to command it, not just be used by it. And if I can't, Elara asked, the weight of his expectations suddenly crushing. Then you will be a symbol without substance, he said, his tone merciless. And in the war that is coming, symbols are the first things to be shattered. He left her at the entrance to a small, empty lodge near the central hall, her lodge, apparently. Inside, a simple pallet, a hearth with banked coals, and a water basin awaited. It was more than the cave. It was a cage of expectations. As she sank onto the pallet, the sounds of the thriving pack outside, the murmur of voices, the yip of a pup, the distant howl of a patrol washed over her. They were the sounds of a pack living without fear. For the first time since her banishment, she was safe from the immediate threat of the wild. But as she stared into the dim coals, the face that haunted her wasn't Kael's or Seraphina's. It was the dying she-wolf's, the corruption writhing beneath her skin. And then it was the empty, skeletal face of the corrupted creature in the Wraith Woods, tilting its head in confusion when she had invoked an alpha's name. She had a place now, but it was on a knife's edge between two alphas, with a strange power flickering in her soul that she didn't understand, and the creeping, rotting scent of the woods was not just outside the territory. It was inside her. The revelation was a quiet, terrifying whisper in her mind. The taint she had pulled from the warrior's wound, it had felt familiar, too familiar. It felt like the Wraith Woods. And as she closed her eyes, exhausted, she could have sworn the faint, ghostly scent of old blood and musk curled not from the north, but from the palms of her own traitorous hands. The silence in the small lodge was absolute, and yet it roared in Elara's ears. The rough-hewn walls, the scent of fresh pine and dried herbs, the soft gray wolf pelt on the narrow bed, all of it was meant to signify sanctuary. A new beginning. Instead, it felt like a cage of terrifying revelations. Lysander's final command echoed. You will learn to use it. You will learn to control it. That is not a request. And beneath that, the deeper, more visceral horror, the memory of that black, viscous corruption writhing under the wounded she-wolf's skin. She hadn't just seen it, she had felt it, a cold, hungry, ancient malice. And when she had pulled it free, a fragment of that feeling had slithered back into her, nestling deep behind her ribs. It felt like the Wraith Woods. It felt like home. A shudder racked her body, so violent her teeth chattered. She wrapped her arms around herself, but the cold was internal. What am I? The question was a pit opening inside her, barren, broken, and now tainted. Was that the true reason the moon goddess had denied her a child? Not a lack, but a corruption? A soft knock at the heavy wooden door shattered her spiraling thoughts. Elara froze, her breath catching. It wasn't Lysander's powerful, announcing presence. This was lighter, hesitant. Enter, she called, her voice rough from disuse and the day's shouting. The door swung inward, revealing the red-furred sentry who had guided her from the ridge. Up close in human form, he was younger than she'd guessed, perhaps only a few years older than her, with kind, amber eyes and a smattering of freckles across his nose. He carried a woven tray laden with a steaming clay bowl, a hunk of dark bread, and a water skin. Alpha's orders, he said with an apologetic half-smile, said you probably forgot to eat. I'm Corin. He stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under his weight, and set the tray on a small table by the hearth, where a low fire crackled. The scent of rich stew, venison, root vegetables, wild thyme filled the space, a stark, normal comfort against the chaos in her mind. Thank you, Elara murmured, not moving from the bed. Corin lingered, shifting his weight. He glanced at her, then away at the fire. That was something. At the border, I've never seen an alpha back down from Lysander like that. Not without losing teeth. His amber eyes met hers again, genuine curiosity in them. You stood your ground after everything they did to you, the pack's talking. Elara's stomach tightened. What are they saying? Lots of things, that you're a Moonfall spy, that you're a witch, that Lysander's gone moon-mad for claiming a barren she-wolf. He saw her flinch and hurried on. But the warriors who were in the lodge, they saw what you did for Anya. The healer, Kaelin, she's spitting mad, but even she can't deny the wound closed clean after you touched it. They say you have the sight, haven't seen that in generations. I don't know what I have, Elara whispered, the confession torn from her. It felt wrong. Corin's expression softened. The Wraith Woods feel wrong to outsiders too, but they protect us. Maybe not all power that feels dark is evil. He nodded toward the stew. Eat, you'll need your strength. Training starts at dawn. Training. With who? With me to start. Combat basics, Lysander's command. Corin gave another awkward half-smile. Don't worry, I'll go easy. You're a political asset now. He said it without malice, a simple statement of fact, but it chilled her. An asset, a weapon, a prized piece. The door shut softly behind him, leaving her alone with the food and the gnawing dread. At dawn. The night was a long, fractured thing. She ate the stew, the flavors ash in her mouth. She lay on the pelt, staring at the firelight dancing on the ceiling, feeling the strange, cold knot of energy inside her pulse in time with her heartbeat. She dreamed not of Moonfall, but of the corrupted wolf creature in the Wraith Woods, its empty sockets staring into her, and its voice, dry as dead leaves, whispering, "Sister." A firm hand shook her shoulder before first light. She jolted upright, a gasp stuck in her throat, the dream's echo clinging to her. Corin stood back, already dressed in worn training leathers. Time to move. The Shadowfen settlement was misty and quiet in the pre-dawn gloom, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and peat smoke. A few early-rising pack members watched from doorways as Corin led her to a cleared, sandy area near the palisade wall. It was a training ground marked with practice posts and weapon racks. Your wolf is weak from disuse and stress, Corin stated, no trace of the hesitant young man from last night. He was all business. You will not shift today. You will build the strength of your human form. Strength of body supports strength of will, and you will need will to control your gift. The training was brutal in its simplicity, running laps around the settlement until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, push-ups in the damp sand until her arms gave out, holding a defensive stance until her muscles screamed. Corin was not cruel, but he was relentlessly thorough, offering only brief corrections and no sympathy. The physical pain was a welcome distraction from the psychic terror. With every burning muscle, the cold knot inside her seemed to recede, quieted by sheer exhaustion. As the sun climbed, painting the mist gold, other pack members began to gather at the edges of the training ground. She felt their eyes on her, curious, hostile, assessing. Whispers carried on the still air. Moonfall's cast-off thinks she's special, saw her at the border, standing with our Alpha. Elara focused on the grit of sand under her palms on Corin's steady commands. She was a political asset, she had to be strong. Enough, Corin said finally as she swayed on her feet after a series of sprints. Water, then we work on stance and balance. As she gulped from a water skin, a new presence darkened the edge of the field. The healer, Kaelin, stood with her arms crossed, her expression a mask of frosty disdain. Beside her was the silver-tipped female sentry from the woods, her gaze sharp and unfriendly. Corin, the female sentry called, her voice a cool blade. Alpha wants you on perimeter patrol, I'll take over here. Corin shot a concerned glance at Elara but nodded. Yes, Sable. He lowered his voice to Elara. Keep your guard up, literally. Sable strode forward, her movements all lethal grace. She wore no training leathers, just simple clothes that did nothing to hide her warrior's build. I am Sable, I lead the border sentries. You made it through my woods. Let's see if you can handle a real challenge. Without warning, she lunged. It wasn't a killing blow, but a swift, open-handed strike aimed at Elara's shoulder. Instinct, born of a lifetime in a pack where dominance was constantly tested, made Elara jerk aside. The strike grazed her, still hard enough to bruise. Pathetic, Sable sneered. You flinch like a rabbit. Moonfall taught you nothing but submission. Anger, hot and bright, flared through Elara's exhaustion. She set her feet in the sandy stance Corin had drilled, raising her hands. Sable's smile was thin, better. She attacked again, a flurry of controlled strikes. Elara blocked some, took others on her arms, each impact jolting up her bones. She was being toyed with, pushed around the circle as the gathering pack watched. You think because the Alpha claims you, you belong? Sable taunted, sweeping a leg. Elara stumbled back, barely avoiding the fall. You are a weakness he brought into our den, a sickly pup from a dying pack. Weakness, sickly, dying. The words merged with Kael's voice from the clearing. Barren, useless, a roaring filled Elara's ears. The cold knot inside her stirred, unfurling like a serpent waking. Sable came in again, aiming a punch at her midsection. This time, Elara didn't just see the movement. She saw a faint, gray shimmer tracing the path of Sable's fist, a ghost image of intent a half-second before the real strike landed. It was the same subtle glow she'd seen around the corruption in Anya's wound. The sight. Acting on pure instinct, Elara pivoted on her weakened legs, not away from the predicted blow, but into it, turning her body so Sable's fist glanced harmlessly off her ribs. At the same moment, she drove her own palm up, aiming for the point where the gray shimmer on Sable's arm was brightest, a nexus of intended force. Her hand connected. There was no great impact. Instead, a jolt like static shock echoed up Elara's arm. Sable gasped, a sharp, pained intake of breath, and recoiled as if burned, clutching her forearm. Her confident sneer vanished, replaced by shock and a flicker of pain. The training ground fell silent. The watching pack members leaned forward. What did you do? Sable hissed, flexing her fingers. The arm didn't seem injured, but the warrior was shaken. I saw, Elara stammered, staring at her own hand. The cold knot within her was awake now, humming, and the world had shifted. She looked at Sable and didn't just see a warrior. She saw a complex lattice of faint, pulsing gray lines, pathways of potential movement, intention made visible. She looked at the crowd and saw similar, fainter auras around them all. She saw Kaelin, the healer, and around her was a different greenish shimmer, tangled with a single dark knot of angry red near her temple, a chronic pain, a headache born of resentment. It was overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful. She used the sight, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the silence. Alpha Lysander stood at the edge of the field. He must have been watching. His silver eyes were fixed on Elara, intense and unreadable. She saw your attack before you committed to it, and she saw the flow of your strength. A disruptive touch in the right place can deaden a muscle, confuse a nerve. He walked forward, the crowd parting for him. Sable, you are dismissed. Report to the Eastern Watch. Sable, still cradling her arm, bowed her head stiffly and shot Elara a look of pure, venomous fury before stalking away. Lysander stopped in front of Elara. The aura around him was not gray or green, but a deep, swirling silver, so potent it was almost blinding, shot through with veins of impenetrable black. It was power, ancient and vast, and the dark threads within it called to the cold knot in her own chest. You see it now, he stated, his voice for her ears alone. The world as it truly is, energy, intention, life. And decay, it's too much, she breathed, her head throbbing. You will learn to filter it, to focus. He raised a hand, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he would touch her. Instead, he pointed to the healer, Kaelin, who still glowered from the sidelines. What do you see around her? Elara forced her gaze to the healer. Green, life energy, but there's a knot of red at her temple. It's angry, it hurts. A murmur went through the pack. Kaelin's eyes widened slightly, her hand twitching toward her own head. Lysander nodded, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. A true seeing. He raised his voice, addressing the pack. Elara of no pack bears the latent sight, a gift our enemies fear, a tool we have lacked. She is under my protection, and her development is paramount to our strength. You will treat her accordingly. It was a direct order. The pack members bowed their heads, though Elara could still see the suspicion in their auras, the flashes of orange doubt and yellow fear. Come, Lysander said to her. Your physical training is done for the day. Now we train your mind. He led her not back to the central lodge, but to a secluded, low stone building built into the side of a mossy hill near the edge of the settlement. The air here was still heavy. The door was ancient oak, banded with iron. My private sanctum, he said, pushing the door open. Inside it was dim, lit by a single shaft of sunlight from a high window. The room was lined with shelves holding strange artifacts. Bundles of dark feathers, stones with natural holes, jars of unidentifiable substances, and scrolls of aged parchment. The scent was of old paper, stone dust, and something metallic. Sit, he commanded, pointing to a low stool in the center of the room. Elara sat, the silence of the place pressing in on her. The chaotic auras of the outside world were muted here, replaced by the deep, slow pulse of the earth and the dense, complex signature of Lysander himself as he stood before her. Close your eyes, he said. Do not try to see, try to listen. Find the thread of power within you, the cold place. She obeyed. In the darkness behind her eyelids, the cold knot was a beacon of icy light. She focused on it, and as she did, her awareness of the room changed. She could feel the layers of power in the stone's old magic protective wards. She felt the thrum of the living fen beyond the walls, and she felt Lysander, a towering presence of silver and shadow. Good, his voice murmured. Now reach out, gently, tell me what you feel in this room, not with your eyes. Elara let her newfound sense drift. She felt the wards, a net of cool, blue energy. She felt the dormant potential in the artifacts, sparks of muted color, and then from a corner she felt something else. A pull. A familiar, chilling resonance. It called to the knot inside her with the same whispering hunger as the wraith woods. Her eyes flew open. She was staring at a simple clay pot on a low shelf. It was unadorned, sealed with wax. What is that? She asked, her voice trembling. Lysander's gaze followed hers. His expression grew grim. A sample, taken from a bloodfang warrior we captured raiding a southern border last moon. He was infected, not with disease, with something older. We put him down, but not before securing that. Elara stood, drawn against her will. She approached the shelf. The pot seemed to pulse with a malevolent black light only she could see. The cold knot in her chest throbbed in sync with it, a terrifying sympathy. It calls to you, Lysander observed, his voice dangerously soft. It feels like what I pulled from Anya, but stronger, purer. She was inches from the pot now. A desperate, morbid curiosity filled her. What was inside? What was this taint that felt like a part of her? Do not touch it, Lysander warned, but it was too late. Her hand, acting on an impulse deeper than reason, rose. She didn't break the seal. She simply hovered her palm over the wax. And she pulled, not with her muscles, but with that cold, inner power. A wisp of inky shadow, visible only to her sight, seeped through the wax seal like smoke. It coiled in the air, a tendril of pure corruption. And then, with a sudden, violent jerk, it streamed across the short distance and sank into the center of her palm. The shock was electric and agonizing. A wave of freezing fire raced up her arm, exploded in her chest, merging with the knot. Visions assaulted her, a dark, endless forest that was not the wraith woods. A chorus of whispering, maddened voices, the glint of a blood-red moon on black fangs, and a pair of eyes, not silver like Lysander's, but a burning, malevolent gold, staring right at her from the depths of the void. She screamed, a raw, ragged sound, and crumpled to the stone floor. Lysander was beside her in an instant, his hands on her shoulders, his own power, silver and searing, flaring around them, trying to push back the invading darkness. Foolish child, he roared, but his anger was laced with stark alarm. Elara writhed, the two forces warring inside her, the ancient, clean silver of the Alpha and the hungry, ancient black of the taint. The golden eyes in her mind held hers, and a voice, smooth as oil and poison, spoke directly into her soul. At last we see you, little spark, the key is found. The voice faded, the visions receded. The cold knot inside her had grown, solidifying into a core of icy, potent darkness, now perfectly integrated. She lay panting on the floor, soaked in sweat, her hand burning. She looked up at Lysander, his face a mask of furious revelation. What was that? She sobbed. Lysander's silver eyes blazed with a storm of emotions, anger, fear, and a dreadful, dawning understanding. He looked from her to the now dormant, harmless-looking clay pot. That, he said, his voice a low, deadly whisper, was not just a taint, that was a beacon, and you have just answered it. He hauled her to her feet, his grip iron. The Bloodfang are not just raiders, they are being driven, corrupted. And they are looking for something or someone. His gaze pinned her, terrified and revealed. The golden eyes described them. Trembling, Elara whispered the vision. Burning, gold, not wolf, something older. Lysander released her as if scalded. A profound dread settled in the sanctum's air, colder than the stone. The stories are true, he breathed, more to himself than to her. The devourer stirs. He looked at Elara not as an asset or a weapon, but as a catastrophic omen. The corruption doesn't just call to you, Elara, it recognizes you. You are not its victim, you are its kin. The floor seemed to drop away. The cliffhanger of her identity shattered, replaced by a far more terrifying abyss. She wasn't just tainted, she was the key. The silence in Lysander's sanctum was absolute, a heavy, smothering blanket after the psychic roar of the devourer's voice. Elara lay on the cold stone floor, her body trembling not from cold, but from a deep cellular violation. The scent of ozone and old blood still clung to the air, but the swirling black mist from the clay pot was gone, absorbed into her skin, her lungs, her very spirit. Lysander loomed over her, his silver eyes wide with a shock she had never seen in them before. The usual ancient calm was shattered, replaced by a stark, calculating dread. He didn't reach to help her up. He simply stared as if seeing a ghost or a weapon primed to detonate. "Get up," he said, his voice a low rasp that scraped against the quiet. Every muscle protested. Her bones felt like lead, weighed down by the foreign presence now nestled inside her. It wasn't painful, not anymore. It was a cold, dormant coil in her core, a sleeping serpent of rot and power. She pushed herself up onto her elbows, the world tilting. The auras in the room, the vibrant, fierce silver of Lysander, the muted glow of the ancient artifacts on their shelves, were now overlaid with a faint, sickly yellow haze, a residual film from what she had consumed. "What?" she croaked, her throat raw. "What did it mean? The key?" "It means," Lysander said, turning away to secure the now empty clay pot in a heavy iron lockbox, the clank of the lock echoing sharply, "that every story, every whispered legend my predecessors dismissed as madness is true. The corruption is not a mindless plague. It is a consciousness, a hunger, and it has been waiting for you." He turned back, his gaze piercing. "You didn't just see its memory, Elara. You established a connection. You called to it and it answered. Do you understand the catastrophe you have just invited?" Shame and terror warred within her. "I didn't mean to. The pull, it was like a cord and I just tugged. And that is what makes you so dangerously unique," he muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. The sound was a rough whisper against his scalp. "No one else feels that cord. No one else could have drained that sample, which took 3 of my best warriors to contain and cost one his life. It should have killed you. Instead, it recognized you." He strode to the sanctum's door, the heavy oak groaning as he pulled it open. The distant sounds of the settlement, the murmur of voices, the crackle of cookfires flooded in, a jarring reminder of normalcy. "We leave now. This place is no longer secure. That connection is a two-way street." Elara stumbled to her feet, her legs unsteady. "Where are we going?" "To the source of your new burden," he said, his silhouette framed in the doorway, "to the heart of the Wraith Woods." They moved under the cover of a moonless night, a cloak of deep velvet pierced only by the sharp pinpricks of stars. Lysander led a silent shadow ahead of her. 2 of his personal guards flanked them, their footfalls unnervingly quiet on the damp earth. The air grew colder as they left the settled fenland behind, the familiar scent of water and peat giving way to the older, darker perfume of pine and deep mulch. Alara's new senses were a cacophony. Every tree seemed to pulse with a faint green lifelight. Small creatures in the underbrush shone like tiny embers of instinct and fear. But beneath it all, like a foul groundwater, was the yellow-black stain of the corruption. It was everywhere here, a subtle infection in the soil, the air, the very roots of the forest. And within her, the coiled presence stirred, a sleepy acknowledgement of its native realm. Home, it seemed to whisper in the back of her skull, not with the devourer's voice, but with her own internalized dread. After hours of silent travel, they arrived at a place that made even Lysander's guards tense, their hands drifting to the knives at their belts. It was a clearing, but unlike any other. The trees here were not dead, but transformed. Their bark was bleached bone-white, and their branches twisted in agonized, unnatural spirals against the sky. In the center was a pool of water so still and black it looked solid, a void in the earth. The corrupt scent here was not a trace. It was a thick, cloying miasma that coated the tongue and made the lungs seize. "The blight pool," Lysander said, his voice barely disturbing the oppressive silence. The only other sound was the occasional plink of condensed moisture falling from a twisted branch into the black water. "This is where it first breached our world generations ago. This is the wound." Elara's stomach churned. The cold thing inside her was fully awake now, thrumming with a vile eagerness. The black pool seemed to call to it. "Why have you brought me here?" she whispered, her voice swallowed by the clearing. "To teach you control," he said, turning to face her. His silver eyes glinted in the starlight. "Your power is not a weapon to be drawn at will like a knife. It is a part of you like your wolf. And like a wild wolf, it must be mastered, or it will master you. You will learn to feel its edges, its weight, without letting it consume you or reach out to that." He gestured to the pool. He pointed to a patch of ground near the pool's edge where a cluster of strange, phosphorescent fungi glowed with a sickly green light. "There, the blight is strong in those growths. I want you to extend your senses toward them. Touch the corruption with your mind and then push it away, not absorb it, repel it." It sounded impossible. The very idea of willingly touching that sickness again made her want to vomit, but the command in his voice was absolute. She knelt on the cold, damp ground, the chill seeping through her trousers. She closed her eyes, trying to ignore the magnetic pull of the blight pool. She reached inward toward the cold coil. It shifted, attentive. Carefully, she extended a thread of that awareness outward toward the glowing fungi. The moment her mental touch brushed the corruption within them, a jolt of nausea and despair shot through her. Images flashed: endless hunger, cold darkness, the dissolution of self. "Come," the fungi seemed to sigh. "Become." Panic flared. Her instinct was to do what she had done in the sanctum, to pull, to draw the taint into the void within herself. It would be so easy. "No," Lysander's voice cracked like a whip. "You are not a vessel, you are a guardian. Push." Tears of strain leaked from her clenched eyes. She imagined her will as a wall of silver light like his aura. She pictured it slamming into the creeping tendrils of the blight. For a moment nothing happened. The despair pressed in, then a spark. A faint, silvery shimmer flickered at the edge of her perception. She focused every ounce of her will, her fear, her refusal to become the key for that devourer, into that spark. The glow from the fungi dimmed, not much but perceptibly. The sense of clinging despair around them lessened, as if a hand had been slightly loosened from a throat. She broke the connection, gasping, her body drenched in a cold sweat. The world spun. Again, Lysander commanded, unmoved. "You have touched it, now you must learn to shape it." The night became a cycle of agony and tiny, hard-won victories. She would reach out, touch the corruption in a stone, a root, a patch of soil, and wrestle to create a barrier, a cleansing pulse. Sometimes she failed, and the blight would surge toward her, only to be met with a fierce growl from Lysander or a warning shift from his guards. Other times, a minuscule patch of ground would clear, the natural brown of the earth showing through a gray film for a heartbeat before the blight seeped back. It was during the 10th or 11th attempt, her mind frayed and raw, that the forest around the clearing changed. The dragging sounds from her first journey through the Wraith Woods returned, but they were closer now, purposeful. From the bone-white trees, figures emerged. They were like the wolf creature she had faced before, but more defined, more intentional. Emaciated, wolf-like shapes with empty eye sockets and jagged bone protrusions. They did not attack. They simply stood at the edge of the clearing, a silent, rotting audience of half a dozen. One of Lysander's guards let out a low, warning growl, the sound vibrating in the still air. "Hold," Lysander said, his eyes fixed on the creatures. "They are not here for violence, they are here for her." As if on cue, the creatures all turned their hollow gazes toward Elara. A wave of recognition washed over her, the same feeling the devourer had emitted, but diluted, fragmented. These were not the source. They were its children, its echoes, and they were curious. One of them, slightly larger than the rest, took a shuddering step forward. Its bony paw crunched on a brittle twig. It stopped a few paces from her, its head tilting. A sound emerged from its lipless maw, a dry, rustling whisper that formed a single, clear word. "Ki." Elara froze, her blood turning to ice. Lysander moved then, a blur of motion. He placed himself between Elara and the creature, his alpha aura erupting, not just dominance, but a palpable, searing force of pure will that manifested as a visible, silver-white light around him. The corrupted creature flinched back, hissing, the others shrinking into the shadows. "She is not yours," Lysander snarled, his voice layered with the power of his wolf. "This place is a border, you will not cross it." The lead creature stared, its empty sockets seeming to drink in the light of Lysander's aura. It did not look afraid, it looked calculating. Then, as one, the figures melted back into the twisted trees, the dragging sounds fading until the clearing was silent once more, save for Elara's ragged breathing. Lysander's aura dimmed, but the tension did not leave his shoulders. He looked down at her, his expression grim. "They have never spoken before. They have never been so bold. Your presence is changing the balance." "Accelerating things. What do they want with me?" Elara asked, her voice small. What does any force want with a key? He replied. To open a door. The devourer is trapped, contained by ancient magic and the geography of this blighted place. Your power to absorb and manipulate its essence. You could be the tool that breaks the last seals. Or, he said, his gaze intensifying, you could be the lock that reinforces them. That choice is the war you must now fight, inside and out. He gestured for her to stand. Enough for tonight. You have taken the first step. You have pushed back instead of taking in. Remember that feeling. It is your only defense. The journey back to Shadowfen was a haze of exhaustion and chilling revelation. The corrupted creatures had spoken. They knew her. The war was no longer a distant threat of pack against pack. It was a primordial conflict, and she was the unwilling epicenter. As they neared the settlement's palisade, the first gray light of dawn staining the eastern sky, a new sound reached them, not the natural sounds of the fen, but the distinct, rhythmic thud of a drum from the central lodge. A slow, solemn beat that spoke of announcement or mourning. Lysander stopped, his head lifting. The two guards exchanged a glance. Before they could take another step, a scout emerged from the mist at a dead run, skidding to a halt before his Alpha. He was breathless, his eyes wide. Alpha, the scout panted, the word clouding in the cold air. A messenger. From the Silvermane Pack to the west, he arrived less than an hour ago. Lysander's jaw tightened, and he bears word from their Alpha, Torvin, the scout said, his gaze flicking nervously to Elara before returning to Lysander. Moonfall's messengers reached them. Alpha Kael and Luna Seraphina are not just demanding her return. They are forging alliances. They're telling the other packs that Shadowfen harbors a blight witch, a corrupted abomination who consorts with the creatures of the Wraith Woods. They are calling for a coalition to cleanse the north. The drum continued its slow, ominous thud in the distance. Lysander's silver eyes hardened into chips of ice. He looked at Elara, not with dread now, but with a ruthless, settled resolve. So the political war begins, and Kael has chosen his opening gambit. To make you a monster in the eyes of the world. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear, carrying the chill of the coming conflict. Your training, Elara, is no longer a matter of control. It is a matter of survival for you and for every wolf in this territory. Starting tomorrow, you learn not just to repel the blight. He turned toward the beating drum, his profile etched against the dawn. You learn to wield it. The silence in Lysander's lodge was thick enough to choke on. The dawn light filtering through the high windows did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in Elara's bones. It was a different cold from the Wraith Woods, not the creeping rot of the blight, but the icy, strategic dread of a war she had unwittingly ignited. Lysander stood before the cold hearth, his back to her, a statue of contained fury. The scout had been dismissed, the dire news hanging between them like a blade on a thread. Silvermane, Lysander finally said, the word a low growl that vibrated in the timber floor. Torvin is a traditionalist, proud, stubborn. He fears what he does not understand, and Kael has just painted a masterpiece of monstrosity for him. He turned, his silver eyes pinning her. You, a blight witch, a corrupter of packs. They will say you seduced your way into Shadowfen to unleash the devourer upon us all. Elara flinched. The accusation was so grotesque it circled back to being absurd, but she knew the power of a well-told lie. She could almost hear Seraphina's voice, sweet and poisonous, weaving the tale. What do we do? We fight, he stated, simple and absolute. But not with claws and fangs alone. Not yet. This is a war of perception first. Kael seeks to isolate us, to make us pariahs so that when his coalition attacks, no pack will object. We must counter his story. He strode toward a heavy wooden chest against the far wall, the thud of his boots deliberate. Kneeling, he opened it. The scent of aged leather and dried herbs wafted out. He withdrew not a weapon, but a garment. He stood and shook it out, a long, sleeveless tunic of supple, charcoal-gray leather, edged with subtle silver thread. It was simple, elegant, and unmistakably of Shadowfen make. You are no longer a ragged exile hiding in a borrowed pelt, he said, holding it out. You are under my protection. You are of Shadowfen. You will look it. You will stand before my pack, and you will stand beside me. Today, Elara's fingers trembled as she took the tunic. The leather was cool and impossibly soft. To wear this was to accept the identity he was forging for her, not a hidden asset, but a public figure, a target. She met his gaze. They're afraid of me, Sable, the healer, others. If I stand beside you, it might divide the pack further. Fear is a tool, he countered, unmoved. It can be shaped. Their fear of you is born of ignorance and Moonfall's poison. We will replace it with respect, or, at the very least, with the understanding that to challenge you is to challenge me. Now change, we go to the training grounds. The morning mist still clung to the fen as Elara followed Lysander out of the lodge. The new tunic fit perfectly, moving with her like a second skin. It felt alien, a costume for a role she didn't know how to play. Whispers slithered through the settlement like snakes, the Blight Witch, the key, the cause of the coming war. She felt the stares like physical touches, some curious, most hostile. The training ground was already active. The thwack of wood on wood, the grunts of effort, the scuff of feet on sand created a rhythm of mundane preparation. As Lysander stepped into the open space, all activity ceased. Dozens of eyes turned to them, the silence sudden and profound. Sable was there, leading a drill with a group of warriors. Her silver-tipped fur seemed to bristle as she saw Elara in the shadow-fin tunic, her lip curled in a silent snarl. Lysander's voice cut the quiet, carrying without need for a shout. Moonfall's Alpha seeks to bring war to our borders. He spreads lies to turn our neighbors against us. He claims we harbor a corruption. He placed a heavy hand on Elara's shoulder, a gesture of possession, of presentation. This is the she-wolf he banished, the one he called barren and worthless. Look at her, Elara wanted to shrink, to vanish into the earth. The collective gaze of the pack was a weight threatening to crush her. In Moonfall, they saw only an empty vessel, Lysander continued, his tone scathing. They were blind. What they cast out as refuse, Shadowfin recognizes as a weapon. She has faced the heart of the blight and walked away. She has a sight that can heal wounds your eyes cannot see. Kael fears what he threw away. He fears her, and he should. A low murmur rippled through the pack. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a shift from seeing her as a lurking danger to seeing her as a declared one. An asset of their alphas. Her training is now the pack's priority, Lysander announced. She will learn our ways, she will fight beside us, and you will teach her. His eyes found Sable. Sable, you will spar with her. Now, a ripple of tense interest went through the warriors. Sable's amber eyes glinted with cold satisfaction. With pleasure, Alpha, Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was no longer a private lesson with Corin. This was a public test, a demonstration. Sable would not hold back. They moved to the center of the sandy ground. Sable shed her own tunic, shifting seamlessly into her wolf form, a sleek, powerful beast with that distinctive silver frosting her paws and muzzle. She shook out her pelt, muscles coiling. Shift, Lysander commanded Elara, his voice low. Elara closed her eyes, reaching for her wolf. The connection, once frail and grief-stricken, was stronger now, tempered by survival and a terrible purpose. The shift was quicker, less painful. Her bones realigned, her senses exploded outward, the damp earth, the sweat and adrenaline of the pack, the simmering aggression from Sable. She stood, a smaller, thinner wolf with a coat of muted brown, facing the seasoned warrior. No signal was given. Sable lunged. It was a blur of speed and fury. Elara dodged, the sand sprang beneath her paws. Sable's teeth snapped a hair's breadth from her ear. The warrior wasn't just attacking. She was herding, testing, showcasing her superior strength and experience. Elara felt a familiar panic rise, the memory of being powerless, of being less than. Clang! Sable's shoulder slammed into her side, knocking the air from her lungs. Elara stumbled, gritting her teeth against a whine. Use your eyes, Lysander's voice barked across the ground. Her sight, he wanted her to use it in combat. She focused, letting the visual noise of the world soften. Sable's aura flared around her. A vibrant, aggressive orange shot through with threads of contemptuous gray. As the warrior lunged again, Elara saw the intent a fraction before the movement. She saw the shift of energy in Sable's hindquarters, predicting the direction. She rolled, not away, but into the charge coming up beneath Sable's guard. Her shoulder connected with the warrior's exposed flank. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it was unexpected. Sable snarled, more in surprise than pain, the pack murmured. Enraged, Sable redoubled her attack, a whirlwind of claws and fangs. Elara relied entirely on her sight, reading the flows of intent, dancing on the edge of each strike. She wasn't winning, but she was not being hit. She was a leaf in a storm, flowing around the violence. Then Sable fainted. Elara's sight saw the flare of deceptive energy in the left, but the true strike came from the right. A massive paw swiped, claws out. Elara twisted, but not enough. White-hot fire scored across her ribcage. A gasp went up. The coppery scent of her blood hit the air. In that instant of pain, her control slipped. Her sight didn't just see Sable's aura. It plunged deeper, past the vibrant orange, into the core of the warrior. And there, Elara saw it, a tiny, dormant knot of shadow. A seed of corruption, no bigger than a pebble nestled deep within Sable's life force. It was inert, harmless, but it was there. A remnant, perhaps, from a patrol too close to the blight pool. Horror and a terrible, hungry recognition flooded Elara. The coiled thing inside her stirred. Sable, poised for a final, dominating pin, froze. Her eyes, locked on Elara's, widened. She took a shuddering step back, a low, confused whine escaping her throat. She wasn't reacting to the blood. She was reacting to what she felt emanating from Elara, a pull, a resonance with the hidden darkness inside herself. Elara broke the gaze, shoving the hunger down, slamming mental doors shut. She panted, the wound on her side burning. The training ground was utterly silent. The display had been inconclusive, but the ending was unnerving. Lysander stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Enough. He looked from Elara, bleeding and trembling, to Sable, who was still staring with unsettled eyes. The lesson is learned. Sable, your strength is undeniable. Elara, your sight is a shield, but a shield alone does not win wars. He raised his voice again, addressing the pack. You see, this is what Kael fears, not a witch, but a power he cannot comprehend. Dismissed, as the pack slowly returned to their drills, the whispers now tinged with a new, uncertain awe, Lysander approached Elara. He didn't comment on the wound. You saw something in her, he stated quietly. Elara shifted back to her human form, the cut on her side stinging. She clutched the new tunic to her chest. A piece of the blight inside her, it's dormant. Lysander's jaw tightened. It is in many who patrol the deep woods. A low-level exposure. It is why we rotate the sentries. It is why the blight does not claim them. It is a seed, not a bloom. He studied her. And it called to you. It wasn't a question. Elara nodded, shame heating her face. I wanted to take it, to make it mine. That, he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, is how you will fight, not with tooth and claw. You will find the seeds our enemies carry, the corruption the blood-fanged blades are dipped in. The taint that Kael in his arrogance may have invited into his own pack to strengthen his warriors, and you will call it to you. You will turn their weapon into your strength. The concept was monstrous, beautifully, strategically monstrous. You want me to drain them. I want you to be a vortex, he corrected, his silver eyes blazing. The lock that contains the devourer must also be able to contain its echoes. You will train not to repel the blight, but to command it. To draw every speck of it from my lands and my people and into yourself, you will become the prison. The weight of it threatened to drive her to her knees. He was asking her to become the very thing Kael accused her of being, a blight witch. A living repository of corruption. And if it consumes me, her voice was a thread of sound. Then you will have served your purpose, he said, without cruelty, with the stark logic of an alpha at war. But I do not think it will. The devourer called you key. A key turns both ways. You will learn to turn it our way. He gestured for her to follow him back toward the lodges. Rest, clean that wound. At moonrise we begin anew in the blight pool. You will not just face the corruption this time, you will summon it. Elara walked, the sounds of the pack fading behind her, replaced by the roaring in her own mind. She was to be a weapon, a shield, a prison, a key, a figurehead, and a sacrifice. The path before her had narrowed to a single dark thread. As she reached her small lodge, the scent of herbs and clean water greeted her. A fresh basin and bandages had been left just inside the door, not by the hostile healer she knew. Perhaps by Corin or one of the guards who had witnessed her at the pool. A small, fragile gesture of care in the maelstrom. She tended to the claw marks, the water stinging. As she wrapped the bandage, her fingers brushed the skin around the wound. It was already cooler, healing fast, too fast. She closed her eyes, reaching inward with her sight. Around the injury, her own life force glowed a steady, resilient gold. But weaving through it, like dark veins in marble, were threads of deep, pulsating violet, the power she had absorbed from the wounded she-wolf. The taint she had pulled from the blight sample. It was integrating, healing her, strengthening her. It was becoming part of her. A soft, scraping sound at her window made her jump. It wasn't the wind. She crept forward, peering out into the deepening twilight. There at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the palisade, a shape stood. Not a wolf, a corrupted creature, its form indistinct in the gloom, a silhouette of twisted limbs and silent observation. It did not approach, it did not chitter. It simply watched her lodge, and as she stared, frozen, it slowly raised one bony, elongated limb and pointed not at her but north, toward the Wraith Woods, toward the blight pool. Then on the cold air, a word drifted, not spoken aloud, but impressed directly upon her mind by the distant, hungry consciousness at the heart of the pool. A single, beckoning, triumphant thought, come. The voice was not a sound, it was a pressure, a tectonic shift in the bedrock of her mind. It did not speak words so much as imprint concepts, vast and cold and hungry, come. Elara gasped, her hands flying to her temples as she sat bolt upright on her cot. The small lodge was dark, the embers in the hearth casting long, dancing shadows. The phantom scent of rot and cold stone filled her nostrils, though the air was clean. Her skin prickled, every hair standing on end. The summons was a hook in her soul, a relentless, silent pull toward the north, toward the heart of the Wraith Woods, the devourer. Its name surfaced in her thoughts like a corpse rising from deep water. It had called her key, and now it was calling her home. A soft, scraping sound at her door made her jump, not the heavy tread of a guard, but something lighter. She crept to the door, her new shadowfen tunic, a rough-spun gray thing that marked her as both pack and weapon, feeling alien against her skin. She eased the door open a crack. On the packed earth threshold sat a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. She looked left and right down the path between the lodges. Shadows moved at the edge of the settlement, the shapes of sentries on their rounds, but no one was near her door. This was the second such anonymous gift. The first had been herbs and a honeycake. This bundle felt different. She picked it up, the cloth cool and slightly damp. Back inside, by the dim glow of the embers, she unfolded it. A simple water skin full, a wedge of hard cheese, and a bone-handled knife, its blade sharp and clean, longer and sturdier than the one left for her in the stream clearing. It was not a kitchen tool, it was a weapon, a gift of survival. The gesture should have warmed her. Instead, a chill worse than the devourer's call seeped into her. Someone in Shadowfen, someone afraid to be seen, believed she would need it. They were preparing her for a journey they knew was coming. The pull from the woods intensified, a dull throb behind her eyes. She could not stay here. If she did, the call would only grow louder, more disruptive. Lysander would sense it. The entire pack would see her unraveling. And the thing in the blight pool, it was waiting. She moved quickly, driven by a fear that was both instinct and compulsion. She pulled on her boots, secured the new knife at her belt alongside the old one, and slung the water skin over her shoulder. She shoved the cheese into a small pouch. The gray wolf pelt from the stream clearing she left folded on the cot. It belonged to a different test, a simpler survival. What lay ahead was something else entirely. She paused at the door, listening. The settlement was quiet in the deep watch of the night. A low murmur of conversation came from the central lodge, and the ever-present sigh of the wind through the fen grasses was a constant backdrop. She focused her sight, not looking for auras, but for the flow of attention. She saw the pulses of life, sleeping pack members like banked fires, the brighter, watchful coils of the sentries on the palisade walkway. There was a pattern to their patrols, a rhythm she'd unconsciously memorized during her days of observation. Now her wolf whisper urged, now. She slipped out, melting into the shadow of her lodge, then darting to the next. She was a ghost, a wisp of the fear they all suspected her of harboring. She used the skills Corin had begun to drill into her. Moving from cover to cover, placing her feet with silent care, controlling her breath. The palisade gate was shut and barred, guarded by 2 sentries. That was not her path. She moved along the inside of the timber wall until she found what she'd noted days before, a place where the thatch of a storage linta brushed against the palisade. It was a vulnerability, a small one. With a glance around, she gathered herself and leaped, her fingers finding purchase on the rough-hewn logs. The taint within her, that coiled, sleeping darkness, flared. Strength, raw and unnatural, surged into her muscles. She hauled herself up and over the pointed tops of the logs with an ease that shocked her, dropping soundlessly into the damp grass on the other side. She was out. The pull became a guide. She didn't need to think of the path. Her body turned north toward the tree line of the Wraith Woods. The healthy, pine-scented air of the fenland began to thin, replaced by the first faint tendrils of that familiar corruption, old blood, wet rot, primordial musk. It should have repulsed her. Instead, a part of her unclenched. The dormant coil inside her stirred, not in alarm, but in recognition. Closer. She broke into a run, not the loping gait of a wolf, but a desperate, 2-legged sprint. The moon was a sliver behind scudding clouds, offering little light. Her sight adjusted, painting the world in gradients of intent and decay. The healthy forest floor glowed a soft, muted green. Ahead, where the true Wraith Woods began, the light sickened into bruise-like purples and voids of black. She crossed the invisible boundary. The temperature dropped, sounds died. Her own footfalls were swallowed by the hungry earth. The woods were not empty tonight. She felt them watching from the darkness between the twisted trees, shuffles, clicks, the dry rustle of things with too many legs. The corrupted creatures, they did not approach, they observed. As she passed a lightning-blasted oak, she saw one, a pale, multi-limbed shape clinging to the bark, its head rotating slowly to follow her progress. A single, sibilant whisper trailed after her, "Ki." She ran faster, her heart hammering against her ribs. The pull was a physical rope now, yanking her forward. The landscape grew more distorted, the trees more grotesque, their branches like clawing hands. She found the path, the same one Lysander's guards had taken her on, and followed it deeper. The air grew thick and hard to breathe, saturated with the blight's essence. Finally, she burst into the clearing, the blight pool. It was exactly as she remembered, yet infinitely worse. The bone-white trees stood in their silent circle. The pool of black water was utterly still, a mirror to nothing, and the presence, it filled the clearing, a weight that pressed on her eardrums and made her vision swim. This was the source, this was the wound. You came, the voice was inside her skull, a satisfaction that felt like ice cracking. Elara staggered to a halt at the pool's edge, her breath coming in ragged gasps. What do you want from me? Freedom, release, you are the key. You feel the lock. She did, looking at the pool, she didn't just see stagnant water. Her sight pierced the surface, diving deep. Below, in the unimaginable dark, she perceived a network of glowing, silver-blue chains. They were immense, ancient, thrumming with a power that tasted of moonlight and frost, Lysander's power, but older, layered over centuries. They bound something vast and formless, a core of infinite hunger and rage. The chains were frayed. In places, the blackness seeped through like ink through cracked glass. The seals were failing. I can't, she whispered, her voice swallowed by the clearing. I won't. You will. It is in you, my essence, my child. The surface of the pool rippled, not from without but from within. A shape began to form in the black water, rising slowly. It was a reflection, but not her own. It was a she-wolf of darkness and starlight, her eyes twin pools of the same burning gold that had stared from the taint sample. It was a version of her that had fully embraced the coil within. I am not your child, Elara snarled, finding a spark of defiance. The reflection smiled, a terrible, knowing expression. You are barren of their life, but you are fertile ground for mine. The weak alpha cast you aside. The strong one seeks to use you as a tool. I offer you purpose, power. To be not the prison, but the queen of what is to come. The vision was seductive, a dark answer to every rejection, every moment of powerlessness, to never be weak again, to make Kael, Seraphina, Sable, all of them see. A sudden, violent crack shattered the silence. It wasn't from the pool, it was from the woods behind her. A tree splintered, then a roar, a deep, furious, wolfen roar that was utterly familiar, Lysander. He crashed into the clearing not as a man, but in his warrior form, a colossal wolf of midnight black and silver, his eyes blazing like mercury in the gloom. He was fury incarnate, his gaze locking first on Elara, then on the manifestation in the pool. You foolish girl, his voice was a guttural growl, layered with human rage. You walked right into its jaws. Two more wolves bounded in behind him, his personal guards, Scar and the other, their forms tense, ready for a fight they couldn't possibly win. The reflection in the pool laughed, a sound like stones grinding. The jailer arrives, too late. The key is the lock. Elara, step away from the water, Lysander commanded, shifting back to his human form in a ripple of muscle and shadow. He stood bare-chested, his expression ferocious. It is lying to you. It offers nothing but consumption. It offers me what you do, Elara shouted back, the terror and confusion of the night boiling over. A role, a purpose, you call me a weapon, a vortex. It calls me a queen. What is the difference? The difference is I am trying to save our world. Lysander took a step forward, his hand outstretched. It wants to end it. What you feel inside you is a fragment, a shard. It is not your power, it is a parasite. My plan is to help you control it, to use that connection to reinforce the seals, not break them. He fears what you could be, crooned the reflection. He fears the key turning in the lock. Do not listen, Lysander's voice cracked like a whip. Look at it, Elara. Use your sight, see what it truly is. Elara turned her sight fully on the burning golden eyes within the reflection. She pushed past the glamour, the promise. She sought the core. And she saw it, not just hunger, not just rage, an endless, screaming loneliness, an agony of separation, of being torn from the fabric of life and trapped in the stagnant, rotting wound for eons. The devourer wasn't just evil. It was a cosmic mistake, a creature of a different order that had been mutilated and imprisoned. Its desire to spread the blight was not conquest, but a desperate, twisted attempt to remake the world into something that wouldn't hurt it anymore. It was in profound, eternal pain, and the coil inside her, it resonated with that pain. It was a piece of that same wounded, alien existence. You see, Lysander said, his voice dropping, urgent. It is a tragedy, but it is a poison. To free it is to let the tragedy consume everything. The reflection's smile vanished, its eyes narrowed. You see too much, little key. The pool erupted, not with water, but with tendrils of solid shadow, whip-fast and cold as the void. They shot toward Lysander. His guards leaped forward, but the shadows swatted them aside like toys, sending them crashing into the white trees with sickening thuds. Lysander roared, a shield of shimmering silver light erupting from his body. The shadows slammed into it, screeching with a sound that tore at the mind. The shield held, but cracks of blackness spiderwebbed across its surface. The SEALS weakened, jailer. Your blood will rust them further. Another tendril, thicker than the rest, spearheaded by a barb of solidified malice, shot from the pool. It bypassed Lysander's shield, aiming directly for his heart. Elara didn't think. The coil within her unleashed. It was not a decision. It was an instinct deeper than pack, deeper than loyalty. It was the same instinct that had made her pull the taint from the wounded she-wolf, a reflexive, consuming hunger. She threw herself between the tendril and Lysander, not with her body, but with her will. Her hands came up and she didn't try to block it. She opened herself. The spear of shadow hit her center. There was no impact, it flowed into her. The cold, screaming, alien pain of the devourer's essence flooded her veins. She screamed, a raw, tearing sound, as the world dissolved into a maelstrom of golden eyes and the taste of rust. The coil inside devoured it, grew, thrumming with a terrifying, full power. She felt the devourer's surprise, then its dawning, horrific triumph. Yes, take it, feed, become the bridge. She was absorbing the attack meant to kill Lysander. She was saving him by taking the poison into herself. Elara, no. Lysander's bellow was filled with real, undiluted terror. The connection was now a floodgate. Through her, the devourer could feel the world. Through her, she could feel its prison. The silver chains in the deep, she could touch them. Her consciousness, intertwined with the blight, brushed against the oldest, most fragile seal. It would take so little, a thought, a nudge, the faintest desire to make the pain stop, to join with the vastness and be free of this torturous vessel. She hovered on the precipice. The power was immense, dizzying. She could be the queen of a new, silent world. She could end her own pain forever. In the storm of darkness, a memory surfaced, not of Kael's rejection or Seraphina's cruelty. It was of a small, cloth-wrapped bundle on a doorstep, a knife, a silent vote of hope from a pack that feared her. And a voice fierce and commanding, cutting through the lies of both alphas and ancient horrors. The difference is I am trying to save our world. With a sob that was both agony and defiance, she wrenched her will away from the ancient lock. She turned the raging flood of power inward, not to embrace it, but to contain it. She forced the new, screaming influx of blight down, compressing it alongside the original coil, wrapping it in layers of her own fragile human will. The connection snapped, the shadowy tendril dissolved into smoke. The reflection in the pool wavered, its golden eyes blazing with fury and something else, betrayal. You choose the cage, for yourself, for all. Elara collapsed to her knees, vomiting black, viscous fluid onto the white, dead grass. Her whole body was shaking, vibrating with contained cataclysm. She felt vastly, dangerously full. The world through her sight was a nightmare panorama. The pulsing, injured aura of Lysander, the unconscious guards with their flickering lifelights, the raging, golden wound of the pool, and the dark, swirling tempest that was now herself. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders. Lysander hauled her to her feet. His face was pale, his own energy depleted from holding the shield. He looked at her not with anger, but with a stark, awestruck horror. What have you done? He breathed. I stopped it, she choked out, black tears streaking her cheeks. You didn't stop it, he said, his voice hollow. You absorbed a direct fragment of its will. You are no longer just a key, Elara. He stared into her eyes, and she knew he could see the storm raging within. You have become a living seal, and the moment you lose control, you will become the breach. A howl echoed in the distance, not from the woods, but from the south. It was a shadowfin alarm howl, sharp and urgent, then another from the east, and another. Lysander's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. The boarders, one of his guards staggered upright, shaking his head. Alpha, he rasped, scout signals, multiple forces converging on the fenland. Elara felt the news like a physical blow. The political war was over. Moonfall, she whispered. Lysander's jaw tightened, his gaze sweeping from the still-seething pool to the trembling, corrupted woman in his grasp. Moonfall, he confirmed, the word a grim promise. And from the sound of it, they haven't come alone. The war for perception had ended. The real war for territory, for survival, and for the unstable, devastating weapon that was Elara had just arrived at their gates. The alarm howls were not one, but a chorus, a rising, discordant symphony of fury and warning that tore through the pre-dawn stillness of Shadowfen. They came from the south, the east, and the west. Not a probing raid, but a coordinated assault. The war Kael had promised was not a future threat. It was here now, hammering at the gates. Lysander's silver eyes, wide with a terror Elara had never seen, snapped from her face to the southern tree line. The raw, psychic echo of the blight pool still vibrated in the air between them, a toxic hum only they could feel. Inside her, the new coil of power, the devourer's offered gift that she had seized and trapped, thrashed like a living thing, burning cold against her ribs. They've timed it, Lysander growled, the words ripped from him. He grabbed her arms, his grip iron. They feel it, the instability. They've come for the crack in the wall. He was already moving, dragging her with him, not back toward the settlement, but on a diagonal sprint through the trees, parallel to the fen. The sounds of chaos erupted behind them. Shouts the clash of steel, the snarls of wolves meeting in battle. The scent of blood and foreign pack musk flooded the air, cutting through the ever-present peat and moss. Where are we going? Elara gasped, her legs pumping, the world a blur of dark trunks and mist. The power inside her pulsed in time with her frantic heartbeat. To the source of the noise, he barked. You are the instability. You will be the focal point. If you break, if you lose control where the fighting is thickest, the devourer doesn't need a key. The door blows open from the inside. The horrifying logic of it struck her. She was no longer just a weapon. She was a walking fault line. The battle wasn't just for territory. It was a pressure being applied directly to the living seal that kept an ancient horror contained. They burst into a scene of controlled pandemonium at the southern palisade gate. The heavy timber gates were barred, but Shadowfen warriors lined the walkways, hurling spears and shooting arrows into the gloom beyond. Through the gaps, Elara saw flashes of movement, wolves in moonfall gray and others in coats of tawny brown and ruddy orange. Silvermane, others she didn't recognize, Kael's coalition. Sable was there on the ground just inside the gate, directing warriors. Her silver-tipped fur was bristling. They're not committing to a full breach, she snarled at Lysander as he skidded to a halt. They're probing, harrying the borders at 3 points, drawing our forces thin. It's a feint, Lysander said, his voice cutting through the din. His gaze was fixed not on the gates, but on Elara. They want her, they want the crack. The main thrust will come where she is. As if summoned by his words, a new sound rose over the battlefield, a deep, resonant howl that carried the weight of command. Kael's howl, it didn't come from the chaotic south, but from the east, from the direction of the narrower, less defended game trails that led into the Wraith Woods. He knows, Elara whispered, her blood turning to ice. He knows I came this way. Lysander's jaw tightened. He looked from Sable to Elara, a brutal calculation happening in his eyes. Sable, hold this gate. You are the southern commander. Give no ground. Sable's eyes flicked to Elara, a mix of resentment and dawning, horrified understanding. She gave a sharp nod. Understood, Alpha. You, Lysander said, turning his full, terrifying attention back to Elara. With me to the eastern tree line, you will stand where I tell you to stand. You will hold the line inside yourself. That is your only objective. Do you understand? She wanted to say no. She wanted to curl around the burning cold in her chest and hide. But she met his gaze and saw the same terror, mirrored and magnified by responsibility. He was gambling everything on her control. She nodded, a stiff, jerky motion. They ran again, a smaller contingent of Lysander's personal guard falling in around them. The sounds of the southern battle faded, replaced by an eerie quiet as they approached the dense, ancient trees that marked the beginning of the Wraith Woods' influence. The corrupt scent was here, but faint, a background note to the sharper, more immediate smell of strange wolves and aggression. They reached a rocky outcrop that overlooked a shallow ravine. Below, the tree line was a wall of shadow, and emerging from it in a disciplined, spreading line were wolves. Moonfall wolves led by Kael himself in his powerful, gray-furred wolf form. Beside him, slightly smaller but radiating vicious intent, was Seraphina. Behind them were Betas, Rylan, and Jax, and a contingent of seasoned Moonfall warriors. They had not brought the full allied force here. This was a precision strike, a retrieval team. Kael shifted, the sound of cracking bone and reforming flesh echoed in the quiet. He stood naked and unashamed in the clearing below, his gaze sweeping the ridge until it locked onto Elara. His expression was not the cold resolve of the clearing, nor the conflicted anger of the border stream. It was a hunter's focus, pure and simple. Elara, his voice boomed, amplified by the ravine. This ends now, you will return. Your corruption ends with you. Lysander shifted beside her, a seamless, silent flow into his massive, black-furred wolf form. He stepped to the very edge of the rock, a silent, dominant challenge. His guards shifted around them, a wall of fur and fang. Elara remained in human form, feeling small and exposed. The coil in her chest squirmed, reacting to the hostility, to the proximity of the man who had cast her out. She felt a pull, not from Kael, but from the woods behind him. The devourer was listening. I am not yours to recall, Kael, she called down, her voice steadier than she felt. You made your choice, I have made mine. Seraphina shifted, her human form clad in a practical leather tunic, her hand resting on her barely swollen belly. Your choice is a disease, you little fool, she spat. Look at what you've aligned with, a pack that consorts with blight. Kael offers you a clean death, a return to pack law. Come willingly and your end will be swift. Force us to drag you from that monster's den and it will be instructional. The threat hung in the air. Elara felt a hot spike of anger cutting through the cold fear. It was the same cruel triumph, the same petty malice, but it was a distraction. You're not here for justice or cleansing, Elara said, the sight flickering at the edge of her vision without her command. She saw the auras of the Moonfall wolves below Kael's a hard, determined gold, Seraphina's a venomous, jealous green. Jax's a conflicted, muddled yellow, but around them, woven through the trees like a faint, sickly mist, was something else, a whisper of the corrupt scent. It wasn't coming from her, it was coming from the woods behind them. The devourer was extending its feelers, drawn by the conflict. You're here because you're afraid, you feel the world shaking, and you think breaking me will put it right. Kael's eyes narrowed. You have always been arrogant. You think this is about you. This is about the poison you carry. The alliance you forged is an abomination. Lysander claims a weapon, but he harbors a plague. Surrender, and we contain it. Fight, and we will burn this fen and everyone in it to salt and ash to be sure. Lysander let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the stone beneath Elara's feet. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. You speak of containment from a throne of sand, little Alpha. Lysander's voice, deep and resonant even in wolf form, projected with unnatural clarity. You banished your only chance at understanding what you fear. You come to my borders, trailing the stink of your own decline, and demand I hand over what is mine. You are not a cleanser. You are a scavenger, hoping to pick at the edges of a power you cannot comprehend. He took one step forward, a promise of violence. Leave now, this is your only warning. Kael did not back down. He raised a hand. The Moonfall line tensed. You have chosen. The battle began not with a howl, but with a silent signal. Moonfall warriors surged forward, shifting in mid-leap, a wave of gray fur and fury aiming for the rocky slope. Lysander's guard met them with a crash that echoed through the ravine. The air filled with the sounds of snarls, the wet impact of bodies, the sharp crack of bone. Elara stood rooted, her breath coming in short gasps. Lysander was a whirlwind of black destruction, holding the center, but Moonfall's numbers were pressing. She saw Corin, his red fur aflash, locked with a larger Moonfall wolf. She saw Sable's silver-tipped lieutenant go down under the combined weight of two attackers. And she saw Kael and Seraphina moving with deliberate purpose not toward Lysander, but carving a path toward the rocks, toward her. Hold the line inside yourself, Lysander's command roared in her mind, even as he tore out a Moonfall warrior's throat. The coil in her chest was a frozen star, drinking in the violence, the fear, the anger. The corrupt mist in the woods thickened, tendrils of it snaking toward the fighting, tasting the spilled blood. She could feel the devourer's hungry attention focused on this spot on her. Jax broke through the line, his human face a mask of grim duty. He held a short spear. "Elara, please," he shouted over the din. "Don't make us do this." But it was Rylan who reached her first. The massive beta, who had carried her to the border, shifted at the last moment and swung a heavy, fur-covered fist at her head. Instinct, trained over the last weeks, took over. Elara ducked, the wind of the blow ruffling her hair. She didn't fight back. She couldn't. Every ounce of her will was focused on the cold, thrashing thing inside her, on keeping it contained. She danced back, evading another grab from Rylan, her sight showing her the trajectories of his attacks a heartbeat before they came. But she was being herded toward the edge of the rocks, away from Lysander. Then Kael was there. He didn't shift. He simply walked through the chaos, his aura a blazing, relentless gold. He grabbed her arm, his fingers like steel bands. "Enough," he said, his voice cold and close. His touch was a catalyst. The coil inside her, resonating with the corrupt mist, with the devourer's attention, with the sheer, violent rejection of his grip, reacted. It was not a burst. It was an unclenching. A wave of invisible force, cold and silent, erupted from Elara's core. It didn't strike outward. It pulled. The corrupt mist in the woods streaked toward her, funneling into the coil. The vitality of the world around her dimmed, the green aura of the Mosgrade, the vibrant life force of the fighting wolves flickered. And from Kael, from the point of contact, a stream of pure golden alpha energy, his strength, his will, was siphoned into her. Kael gasped, his eyes flying wide in shock and pain. He recoiled, releasing her as if burned. A visible tremor ran through him. He looked diminished. Elara stumbled back, the coil in her chest now bloated, gorged on stolen energy. It felt heavy, unstable, and terrifyingly satisfied. The world through her sight was monochrome and drained, except for the pulsing, overloaded cold light within her. The fighting around them stuttered to a halt. Every wolf, Shadowfen and Moonfall alike, felt the wrongness of it, the unnatural draining. Seraphina screamed, not in fear but in rage. "Witch, blight witch. See what she is," Lysander, his muzzle bloody, stared at Elara with dawning, apocalyptic horror. This was not commanding the blight. This was something new, something worse. But the true horror was yet to come. From the darkened woods behind Moonfall's line, where the corrupt mist had been thickest, shapes emerged, not the slow, shambling, corrupted creatures of before. These were faster, more defined. Wolves or the echoes of wolves, their forms made of shifting shadow and the gleam of bone-white teeth. Their eyes were pinpricks of hungry gold, the devourer's children, and they were not ignoring the combatants. With silent, chilling purpose, they fell upon the Moonfall wolves from behind. A young warrior screamed as a shadow wolf wrapped around him, and his vibrant aura was snuffed out in an instant, leaving a hollow, gray shell that crumpled to the ground. Another turned to fight, only for his claws to pass through insubstantial darkness before bony jaws closed on his throat. Panic, pure and undiluted, shattered Moonfall's discipline. This was not an enemy they could fight. This was the very corruption they had come to destroy, and it was devouring them. Retreat, Kael's voice was raw, stripped of its power. He was staring at his own hands, then at the nightmare unfolding in his ranks, then at Elara. The betrayal and terror in his eyes was absolute. Retreat to the stream. The Moonfall line broke, wolves turning and fleeing back into the woods, pursued by the silent, feeding shadows. Seraphina was dragged away by Rylan, her face a contorted mask of hatred and fear directed at Elara. In moments, the ravine was empty of living Moonfall wolves. Only the dead and the dying remained, and the slowly dissipating shadow creatures, which turned their glowing golden eyes toward the ridge once, toward Elara, before melting back into the trees. Silence descended, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the heavy breathing of the stunned Shadowfen warriors. Lysander shifted back to human form. He was bleeding from a dozen gashes, but he ignored them. He walked toward Elara, his steps slow, deliberate. Elara was shaking, the overloaded power inside her feeling like a bomb waiting to detonate. She had drained her former alpha. She had summoned, or attracted, the Devourer's creatures to slaughter her old pack. The coil was no longer just a seal, it was a siphon, a conduit. Lysander stopped before her. He didn't touch her. He looked at her as one might look at a natural disaster given form. "What?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Did you do?" Before she could answer, a new sound cut the air. Not a howl of alarm, but a long, clear, melodic horn blast from the direction of the settlement. It was not a Shadowfen signal. A scout bleeding from a gash on his forehead stumbled into the clearing from the northern path. "Alpha," he cried, his voice cracking. "The western gate, Silvermane, they've broken through, they're in the settlement, and their Alpha, he's demanding parley. He demands to speak with the Blight Witch. He says he has an offer." The silence that followed the scout's words was absolute, broken only by the ragged panting of the warriors and the distant, fading shrieks of the corrupted creatures returning to the depths of the woods. The metallic scent of blood from the eastern skirmish was now underscored by the acrid smell of smoke drifting from the west. The settlement was burning. Lysander's silver eyes, fixed on the trembling scout, were chips of glacial ice. "Torvin is inside our walls," he stated, his voice dangerously flat. "Yes, Alpha, Silvermane breached the western palisade. They hold the gatehouse and the granary lodges. They are not advancing further. Their Alpha calls for parley. He was specific. He will speak only to you, and the she-wolf must be present." He called her by the name they use. The scout's gaze flickered to Elara, who stood shivering, Kael's stolen vitality a sickening heat in her veins. The Blight Witch, Elara flinched. The title was a brand, searing her deeper than any physical wound. She could still feel the ghost of Kael's grip on her arm, the terrifying vacuum of her power pulling his essence into the ravenous coil within her. She felt swollen with it, unstable, a vessel filled to cracking. Lysander turned his gaze on her. The fury and terror from the blight pool were gone, replaced by a ruthless, calculating calm. He was assessing her as a piece on a war table, a volatile asset whose value had just skyrocketed. "Can you stand?" he asked, tone devoid of warmth. She nodded, though her legs felt like water. "Yes." "Can you control it?" He meant the siphon, the conduit, the thing inside her that had turned Kael's triumphant capture into a feeding. Elara looked at her hands. They were clean, but in her sight they pulsed with a deep, amethyst-black light, threads of stolen silver-blue energy, Kael's alpha power swirling in the vortex. "I don't know," she whispered, the truth a confession. "Then you will learn by doing," Lysander said, and it was a command. He barked orders to the surviving sentries. "Sable, secure this perimeter. Burn the Moonfall dead. The corruption's touch is on them. Let nothing fester. Corin with me." We returned to the settlement. The red-furred warrior, Corin, moved to Elara's side, his expression grim but his presence steadying. He did not touch her. The journey back was a nightmare of rising sound and looming threat. The peaceful trails of Shadowfen were now choked with the movement of warriors running to reinforce positions, the cries of the wounded being carried to the central lodge, and the pervasive, growing stench of smoke. As they broke from the tree line, the sight of the settlement struck Elara like a physical blow. The western section was a scar of chaos. A segment of the high timber palisade was shattered, blackened by fire. Silvermane warriors, larger, bulkier wolves with distinctive pale, shaggy pelts, stood guard atop the broken gatehouse and clustered around several lodges, their banners hanging limp in the smoky air. Within Shadowfin's intact areas, Lysander's warriors formed tense, bristling lines, a standoff frozen in snarling silence. The air vibrated with the threat of imminent, total slaughter. Lysander never broke stride. He shifted seamlessly into his human form, pulling on a pair of trousers offered by a guard, and strode toward the central clearing, a force of nature cutting through the anxiety of his pack. Elara, still in her wolf form, followed at his heel, Corin a shadow behind her. Every eye tracked them. She felt the weight of the stairs, the fear of her own pack, the burning curiosity and hatred from the Silvermane interlopers. In the center of the clearing, before the steps of the central lodge, a space had been cleared. A massive, barrel-chested man with a thick, silver-streaked beard and arms corded with muscle stood waiting. Alpha Torvin. He wore a vest of hardened leather, and a great axe was strapped to his back. Beside him stood a lean, sharp-faced she-wolf with calculating eyes, his beta. A half-circle of his best warriors flanked them. Lysander stopped 10 paces away. "Torvin, you break my walls and call it parley." Torvin's voice was a gravelly rumble. "I open a door you kept locked, Lysander. Your borders have been closed too long. We come to talk of the sickness you nurture." His pale eyes, the color of winter sky, locked onto Elara. They held none of Kael's personal betrayal, only a cold, pragmatic revulsion. "So this is the source of the blight. She smells of it, and of fear." Elara forced herself to hold his gaze, to not cower. She shifted, the transformation aching through her overcharged body. A guard tossed her a simple tunic. Dressed, feeling exposed and brittle, she stood beside Lysander, trying to emulate his unshakable posture. "She is a member of my pack," Lysander stated, the lie smooth and absolute. "You have no claim here." "Every pack has a claim when a plague is bred," Torvin boomed, gesturing to the west. Moonfall's messengers spoke truth. "You consort with the corruption of the Wraith Woods. You harbor the thing that causes it." Kael's mate, barren and bitter, who fled to the dark and made it her home. He took a step forward, his presence aggressive. "He offers a coalition, Lysander. Silvermane, Moonfall, and the Ridge runners to the south. We will cleanse this land of the blight and the pack that fosters it, unless, Lysander's tone was dangerously soft. Torvin's gaze never left Elara. "Unless you hand her over, a trade, the blight witch for the safety of your pack. We take her, we contain her, we study how to seal the wound she represents. Your borders remain, your pack lives." "Refuse," he shrugged, a gesture that encompassed the armed warriors at the broken gate. "The war begins now, and it ends with Shadowfin ash." A collective growl rippled through the Shadowfin ranks. Sable, who had just arrived from the east, bared her teeth, her hostility now directed at the foreign Alpha. Lysander was silent for a long moment, the only sound the crackle of distant flames and the tense breathing of hundreds of wolves. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment she had feared since her banishment. She was a commodity, a token to be bargained. Her value to Lysander was strategic, but was it worth the annihilation of his entire pack? She looked at him, waiting for the dismissal, the betrayal that logic dictated. He spoke, his voice carrying to every ear. "You are a fool, Torvin. Moonfall has played you. Kael does not want her contained. He wants her destroyed because she is a power he failed to control. He fears what she is becoming." Lysander took a step forward, his own alpha power rising, a pressure that made the air thick. "You speak of the blight as a plague. It is a weapon, and she is its master. You think to take my weapon from me on the eve of war. You are not offering peace. You are demanding my surrender." Torvin's face darkened. "You admit you weaponized the corruption." "I admit I am not so weak that I banish a resource out of fear and superstition," Lysander shot back, a direct, scathing insult to Moonfall. "You have seen my borders. The Wraith Woods stand. The blight is contained by her. Hand her over, and you assume the burden of that containment. Are you ready, Torvin? Are your shamans and healers prepared to hold back the tide that has been knocking at your own western marches for a generation? Or will it spill into Silvermane lands the moment she leaves my territory?" Elara listened, stunned. He was reframing the entire narrative. She was not a witch, she was a warden, not a source, but a shield. Torvin hesitated, his beta leaning in to whisper rapidly in his ear. The calculation in his eyes was evident. Kael had spoken of a monstrous, unstable creature. Lysander spoke of a dangerous but controlled tool. Both could not be true. "Prove it," Torvin demanded suddenly, pointing a thick finger at Elara. "A demonstration. If she commands it, let her call the blight, let her send it back. Show me control, not just pretty words." All eyes swiveled to her. Elara's breath caught. The coil inside her stirred, responding to the attention, to the fear and aggression in the clearing. The Devourer's presence was a faint, eager whisper at the edge of her mind. Let us show them. Lysander looked at her, his gaze an unspoken command. You must, she had no choice. Failure meant death, or worse, being handed to Kael and Torvin. She closed her eyes, reaching inward. Not to the deep, hungry well of the Devourer, but to the more recent, swirling energy she had taken from Kael and the land. The siphon power. It was wild, alien, but it was there. She imagined it not as a vortex pulling in, but as a pressure seeking release. She opened her eyes, her sight activating. The world dissolved into auras. Torvin blazed a stubborn, earthy brown. His warriors were similar hues. The Shadowfen wolves were cooler tones of forest green and deep blue. And all around, especially near the broken western gate, she saw it, the sickly, dripping yellow-green of the corruption's residual touch, carried on the weapons and boots of the Silvermane warriors who had fought through the blight-touched outskirts. She focused on that residue. She raised a hand, not in a dramatic gesture, but a slow, deliberate movement, palm facing the ground near Torvin's feet. She didn't call the blight, she pushed. The stolen energy within her, Kael's silver-blue vitality, flowed out, a visible ripple in the air to her sight. It washed over the ground, a cleansing wave. Where it touched the faint, clinging stains of corruption, the yellow-green smears sizzled and evaporated into harmless, dark smoke that dissipated on the wind. A gasp went up from the Silvermane ranks. They had seen the faint, sickly glow, and now they saw it purged. It was a small act, but a precise one. Control, not chaos. Elara lowered her hand, trembling with the effort. The display had cost her some of the stolen energy, leaving her feeling hollowed but clearer. Torvin stared at the spot, then back at her, his expression unreadable. The bluff of superstition had been called. Lysander had presented evidence of utility. She is a siphon, Lysander said into the quiet. She takes and she can give. She can cleanse what the blight stains. This is why Moonfall wants her destroyed. Not because she is a witch, but because she is the only thing that can negate the advantage they sought by allying with the very corruption they decry. It was a masterstroke, Elara realized. He was weaving Kael's coalition into a conspiracy, painting Moonfall as hypocrites who used the blight as a weapon, but feared the one who could counter it. Torvin rubbed his beard, the gears turning. The promise of easy conquest was fading, replaced by the complex reality Lysander presented. A pretty trick, he grunted, but it does not change the armies at your gate. Moonfall and Ridge Runner forces gather on your southern border as we speak. My wolves are inside your walls. You are surrounded, Lysander. You have one weapon, we have 3 packs. Then perhaps you should reconsider which weapon is more potent, Lysander said, a sharp smile touching his lips. You came for a parley, I counter your offer. Do not take the Blightwitch, take instead an alliance. The words hung in the smoky air. Elara's head spun. The shift was too rapid. Alliance, Torvin scoffed, but he was listening. Moonfall seeks to dominate these territories, using the fear of the blight as a pretext. They have manipulated you into breaking my walls for them. Stand with me. Withdraw your warriors from my granaries. Let us turn our combined forces south to the true aggressors. In return, Shadowfen offers you access to what Moonfall promised but could never deliver, a true defense against the corruption. He gestured to Elara, will cleanse your western marches. Your lands will be secure for the first time in decades. It was a breathtaking gamble. He was offering Elara's power as a bargaining chip, a service to be rendered. Torvin's beta whispered furiously in his ear again. The Silvermane Alpha's eyes narrowed. You ask me to betray a sworn coalition based on the power of one fragile she-wolf. I ask you to choose the winning side, Lysander said, his voice dropping to an intimate, deadly serious tone. Look at her, Torvin, truly look. She walked the Wraith Woods and survived. She faced the heart of the blight and returned. She drained an Alpha's power on the battlefield today. She is not fragile. She is the pivot upon which this war turns. Align with the past, with fear and superstition, and you will be another pawn in Kael's empire. Align with the future, and you secure your legacy. The silence stretched. Elara could hear the crackle of the distant fire, the beat of her own heart. She was a prize, a weapon, a peace offering, and a prophet all at once. The weight of it was crushing. Finally, Torvin let out a long, heavy breath. I will confer with my beta, alone. He turned and stalked toward the captured gatehouse, his beta and commanders following. Lysander did not move, a statue of poised authority. But Elara, standing close, saw the minute tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his fingers where they were clasped behind his back. The fate of his pack hung on the greed and fear of a rival Alpha. Minutes bled by, each one an eternity. The sun dipped lower, staining the smoke in the sky a bloody orange. Then Torvin returned. His expression was grim, resolved. He stopped before Lysander. The alliance with Moonfall is void, he announced, his voice carrying. A ripple of shock went through both packs. My warriors will withdraw from your granaries and hold the breach, but not against you. We will hold it against any other until dawn." Lysander gave a single, slow nod, and after dawn. After dawn, Torvin said, his pale eyes finding Elara once more, "You will bring her to my western border. She will cleanse the blighted canyon there as a show of good faith. If she succeeds, Silvermane will stand with Shadowfen against Moonfall. If she fails, or if this is a trick," he let the threat hang, "we will finish what we started here today." He turned and barked orders. Slowly, the Silvermane warriors began to pull back from the captured lodges, forming a defensive perimeter at the shattered gate. Lysander turned to his people, raising his voice. "The west is secured to the southern palisade. Prepare for Moonfall's assault." As the pack surged into motion, a new purpose driving them, Lysander finally looked at Elara. The calm mask slipped for an instant, revealing the exhausted, desperate man beneath. "You have until dawn to learn how to heal the land," he said, his voice low and raw. "Not just cleanse a stain, heal a wound. If you cannot, Torvin's temporary wall becomes a cage and we will be crushed between him and Kael." He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the chaotic clearing, the scent of war and smoke thick around her. The reprieve was temporary, the test was absolute, and in the depths of her soul the devourer chuckled, a sound of dry bones shifting in a deep pit. "He asks you to mend my tears, little key," it whispered, its voice a curl of frost in her mind. "Come to the wound, let us see what grows from it." Chapter 12. The silence in the lodge was absolute, a vacuum after the storm of the parley. The scent of pine resin and cold stone did nothing to mask the tension coiling in the air. Elara stood before the hearth, its fire the only movement, and stared at her hands. They looked the same, they did not feel the same. They felt like conduits to a bottomless, hungry dark. Lysander's voice cut through the quiet, sharp as a blade. "Dawn is not a suggestion, it is a deadline. Fail and Torvin's wolves will be the first to tear you apart. Succeed," he paused, the weight of the word hanging between them. "Succeed and we have a chance, a slim one." She turned, he was by the window, a silhouette against the fading gray light, watching the settlement. Silvermane wolves, distinct with their lighter, tawny pelts, were pulling back from the captured lodges near the western breach. It was a staged, cautious withdrawal, a temporary truce written in wary glances and bared teeth. "He doesn't believe I can do it," Elara said, her voice hoarse. "He believes in results, show him one." Lysander finally looked at her. His silver eyes held no comfort, only a brutal assessment. "The canyon is not like the residual taint on a blade, it is a festering wound. The corruption there will be deep, old, and potent. It will call to the coil inside you. You must answer that call, but you must command the conversation." A shiver traced her spine. Command, the word felt foreign. Her experience with the blight was one of absorption, of desperate containment, of being a lock, not a surgeon. "And if it commands me," the question was a whisper. "Then we are all devoured," he stated, no inflection. "The sentries are ready. Corin will lead your escort. Sable will guard your back." Sable, the name was a flinch. The memory of the warrior's recoil, of the dormant seed Elara had seen within her, was fresh. "She is my best, and she fears what you are. That makes her vigilant. Do not mistake her hostility for disloyalty. She will die to complete this mission." He stepped away from the window, his presence filling the space between them. "You are no longer the banished she-wolf of Moonfall. You are the warden of Shadowfen, the key to our survival. Act like it." The title was a mantle of ice settling on her shoulders. Warden, it sounded like a jailer. Of herself most of all. "Come to the wound, little key. Let us speak of healing." The devourer's voice was a silk-lined rasp in the back of her skull, more present since the confrontation at the blight pool. It did not feel like an invasion now. It felt like a thought that had always been there, finally stirring. The journey west, out of Shadowfen and into Silvermane territory, was a tense, silent procession under a bruised twilight sky. The world smelled different here, drier, with the scent of sage and cracked earth beneath the evergreen. Corin moved ahead, his red pelt a muted beacon, his ears constantly swiveling. 4 other Shadowfen sentries flanked them, their footfalls soft on the needle-strewn path, and behind, a constant, prickling presence, Sable. Elara could feel the she-wolf's amber gaze on her back, a physical pressure. They moved at a ground-eating lope, the urgency of the dawn deadline a drumbeat in their pace. After an hour, the forest began to thin, the trees growing stunted and twisted. A new scent layered over the landscape, not the rich, organic rot of the Wraith Woods, but a dry, acrid bitterness like ash and spoiled metal. Corin slowed, raising a fist. The group halted. He pointed ahead, through a final screen of skeletal pines. The land fell away into a canyon. It was not vast, but it was deep, a jagged tear in the earth. No vegetation grew on its rust-colored cliffs. At its bottom, a river should have flowed. Instead, a sluggish, iridescent black stream oozed, catching the last of the light in sickly rainbows. The air above it shimmered with heat haze, though the evening was cool, and the silence, it was a thick, muffling blanket. No insect hum, no bird call. Just the low, subaudible thrum that vibrated in Elara's teeth. The blight scar, Corin murmured, his usual cheer absent. It's been spreading, apace every moon. Torvin lost a patrol in their last season. They came out wrong. He had to put them down. Elara's stomach clenched. She reached for her sight, letting it bleed into her vision. The world erupted into a nightmare tapestry. The canyon wasn't just a physical place. It was a weeping sore on the fabric of the world. Rivers of violent puce-green energy pulsed from the black stream, crawling up the cliff faces like diseased veins. The air was thick with drifting motes of decay, a swirling, mustard-yellow mist of sickness. And deep in the heart of the canyon, where the stream pooled, a knot of darkness throbbed. It was a heart, a corrupted living heart, home, the coil inside her side, a deep, resonant pull, her own breath hitched. By the moon, one of the sentries whispered, taking an involuntary step back. Sable stepped forward, coming abreast of Elara. She didn't look at her. Her gaze was fixed on the canyon. How, was all she said, the word tight. Elara had no answer. The scale of it was overwhelming. Cleansing a knife wound was one thing. This was like being asked to drain a poisoned ocean with her hands. You see it, the truth of me, not a monster, but a sickness, a pain that has leaked into your world. The Devourer's voice was closer now, humming in unison with the thrum from the canyon. To heal a wound, you must touch it. Will you touch me, Elara? I have to go down there, Elara said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. No, Sable stated flatly. Our orders are to secure the rim. You do your work from here. It won't work from here. Elara turned to meet the warrior's hostile gaze. The source is at the bottom. I have to reach the heart of it. Sable's lip curled. This is a trap, a convenient way for Torvin to be rid of you without breaking his word. Maybe, Lysander's voice echoed in her memory, ruthless, act like the warden. But it's the only path we have. Corin with me. Sable, hold the rim. If anything comes out that isn't us, you know what to do. For a heartbeat, Sable looked as if she would argue. Then her jaw hardened. She gave a sharp, grudging nod. Don't linger. The descent was treacherous. The rock was brittle, crumbling under hand and paw. They went in human form for better grip, claws extended to dig into stone. The thrum grew louder, becoming a pressure in Elara's ears, a vibration in her bones. The acrid smell intensified, coating her tongue. As they neared the canyon floor, the world through her sight became almost blinding in its violent, sickly luminescence. They landed on coarse, black sand. The iridescent stream flowed sluggishly a dozen yards away. Up close, she could see things in it, shapes that might have been bones or roots constantly forming and dissolving in the oily current. Here, the devourer whispered, the wound is open. Touch it. Elara, Corin's voice was tense. He had shifted back to his wolf, a solid, red-furred barrier between her and the stream, his hackles raised. Stay close, she breathed, but don't touch me. No matter what happens, she approached the stream's edge. The pull from the knot of darkness in the pool was magnetic. Her blood sang with it. The coiled power inside her unspooled, a serpent of shadow rising to meet its kin. She knelt in the black sand, the heat from the ground seeping through her trousers. Hesitantly, she reached a hand toward the shimmering black water. Elara, don't, Corin barked. Her fingers broke the surface. Sensation exploded. It was not cold nor hot. It was a void of feeling. 1,000 whispers poured into her, not words but experiences. The crushing weight of eons trapped in stone. The searing agony of a world's magic turned septic. The lonely, gnawing hunger that had no name. It was the Devourer's memory, its pain, its essence. Yes, the voice was a roar of triumph and anguish. The black stream reacted, it climbed. Tendrils of liquid shadow lashed up her arm, not burning, but sinking into her skin, merging. The puce-green energy veins on the cliffs flared, then began to stream downward, toward her, like rivers reversing course into a whirlpool. She was the whirlpool. A scream lodged in her throat. It was too much. The canyon's corruption was a flood, and she was a cracked vessel. She felt herself stretching, thinning, on the verge of shattering. The coil inside was ecstatic, drinking it all in, growing denser, darker. Stop, you have to stop, Corin was howling, but his voice was underwater. She tried to pull her hand back, but the stream held her fast. She was not absorbing it, she was fusing with it. Visions flashed. Not just the Devourer's prison, but other places. A frozen lake under a dead moon, a cavern system pulsing with a sickly light, a city of crystalline spires, shattered and silent. Other wounds, all connected. We are Legion, we are the pain your world inflicts upon itself. I am but the echo. The Devourer's voice was now a chorus layered with countless others. Be our conduit, be our release. No, the thought was hers, a spark in the drowning dark. She was not a release valve. She was a warden, a lock, a seal. She focused not on taking more in, but on the coil itself, on the dense, contained cataclysm now raging inside her chest. She imagined walls around it. Not stone, but will. She imagined not absorbing the stream, but commanding it, pushing back. You are a wound, she gritted out, blood trickling from her nose. And a wound can be closed. She reversed the flow. It was like trying to lift a mountain with her mind. Agony ripped through every nerve. But slowly, tremulously, the black tendrils slithering up her arm began to recede, the rivers of puce green energy slowing their rush toward her. The knot of darkness in the pool shuddered. You fight your own nature, the chorus shrieked, a sound of betrayal and fury. It's not my nature, Elara gasped. She pushed harder, visualizing the corruption not as an enemy to be consumed, but as a sickness to be quarantined. She compressed it, forcing the sprawling, leaking energy back toward the central pool, containing it, making the wound smaller, tighter, sealed. The black stream began to clear. From the bottom up, the iridescent oil faded, revealing ordinary, silt-laden water beneath. The puce-green veins on the cliff face dimmed, then crumbled to gray ash, drifting away on a sudden, clean breeze. The thrumming silence shattered, replaced by the tentative trickle of water over stone. Elara wrenched her hand back and collapsed onto the sand, trembling violently. Her arm was unmarked, but it felt heavy, alien. The coil inside her was sated, monstrously full, a black sun nestled behind her ribs. But the canyon was quiet. The air no longer tasted of ash and metal, but of damp stone and cold night. Corin crept forward, nosing her shoulder. A low, worried whine escaped him. She looked up. The sky above the canyon rim was deep indigo, speckled with early stars. On the rim, she saw the silhouettes of the sentries and Sable standing perfectly still, looking down. Elara pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet, her legs held. She took a shuddering breath. It's done, she whispered. But as she turned to begin the climb, a new sound carried on the clean breeze from the east, not the sound of the blight. It was the sound of war, distant but unmistakable, the clash of steel, the snarls of wolves, and the rising chorus of battle howls. Too many howls, not just from one direction. A shadow fell across the newly cleansed stream. Sable had shifted to human form at the canyon's edge, her face pale in the starlight. Her voice, when it came, was stripped of all hostility, sharp with pure alarm. The dawn deadline was a ruse, she called down, the words slicing through the fragile peace. Moonfall and the Ridge runners didn't wait. They're attacking the southern perimeter. Now. And Lysander's signal just went up. She pointed east toward Shadowfen. A single, blazing red flare was burning against the night sky, a droplet of blood above the trees. It was the signal for catastrophic breach, for last stand. The alliance with Silvermane was secured, but they were already too late. The red flare's afterimage burned against the twilight sky, a silent scream of warning that turned Elara's blood to ice. The distant, muffled roar of battle, clashing steel, savage snarls, the panicked shouts of her new pack was a physical blow against the sudden, ringing silence of the cleansed canyon. They've attacked the southern perimeter, Sable snarled, her silver-tipped fur bristling. She was already moving, a sleek shadow flowing back up the canyon path, the Alpha's signal. They've broken the truce before it was even sworn. Corin, the red-furred sentry, looked from the now clear pool of water to Elara, his amber eyes wide with a conflict of duties. The Alliance, Torvin's wolves. We'll hold the west or they won't, Sable snapped over her shoulder, her voice cutting through the cold air. Our Alpha is under attack in the south, our place is there. Move. Elara's legs trembled, not from the descent but from the massive, throbbing weight now coiled deep within her core. The Blightscar was gone, its corruption compressed into a dense, seething knot of energy that sat beside the Devourer's original fragment. It was a second son of agony in her gut, cold and hungry. She could feel it pulling at her, a whisper of static at the edge of her hearing. But the flare and the sounds of war were a more immediate call. She pushed herself into a run, following Sable's retreating form. The world through her sight was a chaotic overlay. The canyon walls, once pulsing with sickly green veins, now glowed with a faint, healthy silver resonance. But her own body was a storm cloud of iridescent black and bruised purple, the two coils of blight swirling like opposing magnets. The Shadowfen escorts around her blazed with the amber of battle focus and the sharp citrus tang of fear. They ran, a desperate pack streaking across the silvered sagebrush of Silvermane's western approach. The wind carried the scent now, not just pine and fenwater from Shadowfen, but the acrid stench of smoke, spilled blood, and the particular musk of unfamiliar wolves. Ridge runners, Moonfall. Her heart hammered against the prison of her ribs. Kael, he was here. He had not waited for diplomacy to fail. He had come to take or to kill. The journey back was a blur of straining muscle and panicked breath. As they neared the Shadowfen border, the sounds crystallized into horrifying clarity. The crunch thud of bodies colliding, the shriek of claws on shieldwood, a guttural howl of triumph cut abruptly short by a wet, tearing sound. The air grew thick with the copper-sweet smell of blood and the sour odor of fear piss. They burst from the tree line into a scene of chaos. The southern palisade, once a formidable wall of sharpened logs, was a shattered gap. Flames licked up from two of the watchtowers, casting hellish, dancing shadows over the melee. Wolves in Shadowfen Grey fought in tight, disciplined formations, but they were being pressed back by a swirling tide of attackers. Elara recognized Moonfall's earthy browns and tans. Mixed among them were wolves in dusty, rock-colored pelts, the Ridge Runners, lean and fierce. In the center of the maelstrom, like a rock breaking a river, was Lysander. He fought in his humanoid form, a whirlwind of lethal grace. A long, dark blade was an extension of his arm, shearing through claws and weapons alike. His silver eyes were chips of glacial ice, his power radiating from him invisible, crushing waves that made nearby enemies stumble. But even he was being overwhelmed. A knot of Ridge Runner warriors, armed with hooked nets and long spears, were trying to encircle him, while Moonfall wolves harried his flanks. To the Alpha, Sable howled, a raw, commanding sound, and her contingent of escorts melted into the fray with practiced brutality. Elara stood frozen at the tree line, the world narrowing to the surreal horror before her. This was because of her, this slaughter, this fire. The coiled masses inside her pulsed in time with the screams. A familiar scent cut through the smoke, oak moss and cold river stone. Her head snapped to the right. Kael emerged from the smoke near the broken gate, flanked by Rylan and Jax. He was in his warrior form, larger than she remembered, his pelt matted with blood not his own. His golden eyes scanned the battlefield, not with battle fury, but with a chilling, calculated purpose. They passed over Lysander, over the struggling lines, and locked onto her. He had found her. He didn't howl, he simply pointed a clawed finger in her direction and gave a sharp, guttural command to his betas. They began cutting a path toward her, a wedge of Moonfall fury aimed at the tree line. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through Elara. She took a step back. The coils within her squirmed, responding to her fear. See the feast, little key, see the blood water for the roots. The devourer's voice was a sigh of pleasure in her mind. Let me drink, let us drink. No, she whispered, clenching her fists. Elara, Corrin's voice strained, came from her left. He was locked in combat with a Ridge Runner, barely holding him off. You can't stay here, you're exposed. She was a beacon of stillness in a storm of motion. Kael was getting closer, Rylan shoving a Shadowfen warrior aside with brutal force. Run, she had to run, but where? Into the burning settlement, deeper into the woods. A new sound rose above the din, a deep, rhythmic thumping of many paws coming from the western side of the settlement. Not the scattered sounds of the breached southern fight, but the organized thunder of a warband on the move. Through the smoke and chaos, a new force poured into the southern clearing. Wolves in Silvermane's tawny pelts, led by the massive, broad-shouldered form of Alpha Torvin. They did not attack the Shadowfen lines. Instead, with a series of sharp barks from Torvin, they slammed into the exposed flank of the Ridge Runner contingent encircling Lysander. The tide turned just for a moment. The Ridge Runners, caught between Shadowfen's stubborn defense and Silvermane's fresh, furious assault, buckled. The pressure on Lysander eased. He dispatched a final Ridge Runner with a brutal downward strike of his blade and turned, his gaze finding Torvin. A single, sharp nod passed between the Alphas. The pact, sworn in a cleansed canyon, was being honored. But Kael had seen it too. His calculated advance toward Elara faltered, his head whipping toward the new development. Rage contorted his features. Seraphina's political web was unraveling, his coalition was fracturing. His eyes snapped back to Elara, and the calculation was gone, replaced by pure, venomous resolve. If he could not have the alliance, he would have the prize. He would deny her to Lysander, Jax. With me, Kael roared, and he abandoned subtlety, shifting into a full, powerful lunge directly toward her, a golden-eyed missile cutting through the battle's edge. Elara's breath caught, she couldn't outrun him. Her body was leaden with exhaustion and the weight of the blight. The sight showed her his aura, a corona of furious, desperate orange, shot through with the sickly green of Seraphina's influence. It was coming for her, instinct took over. Not the instinct to flee, but the instinct that had saved Lysander at the blight pool, the instinct of the conduit. As Kael closed the final yards, his claws extended, his jaws wide for a crushing grab, Elara did not raise her hands in a futile block. Instead, she dropped all her internal shields. She opened the cage inside her soul, not to release but to pull. She focused on the green taint in his aura, the lingering, possessive mark of Seraphina's will, the symbol of the choice that had broken her. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Kael's charge faltered mid-leap. He crashed to the ground 3 feet before her, skidding in the mud and blood. A visible, shimmering stream of green-gold energy, his alpha power, mingled with that foreign influence, snaked from his chest toward Elara. It wasn't the full, drowning siphon of the ravine. This was a targeted surgical pull. He gasped, a sound of profound shock and violation, his body convulsing. What are you doing?" he choked out, his eyes wide with a terror deeper than any battle fear. Elara felt it flood into her, hot, potent, and bitterly familiar. It fed directly into the two cold masses of blight. They thrived on it, swelling with pleasure. The devourer crooned in ecstasy. "Yes, the taste of a betrayer's strength more. I am not your property to reclaim," Elara said, her voice strangely calm over the battlefield's roar. She severed the connection. Kael lay panting on the ground, visibly weakened, his aura dimmed. The green taint was gone, scoured clean by her pull. He looked up at her, not as an alpha to a banished she-wolf, but as a broken man to an incomprehensible force. The certainty that had defined him was gone. Jax arrived, skidding to a halt beside his fallen alpha. He looked from Kael's prone form to Elara, his expression one of utter devastation. The pity he'd once shown in the woods had curdled into horror. Before he could act, a shadow fell over them. Lysander landed between Elara and the Moonfall betas with a ground-shaking impact. His clothes were torn, his blade dark with blood, but his power was a palpable, crushing field. He didn't even look at Kael. His silver eyes were on Jax. "Take your broken alpha and go." Lysander's voice was low, but it carried over the din like a death knell. "Tell your Luna her poison has been purged. The next Moonfall wolf to cross my border dies." Jax, with a last haunted look at Elara, hauled Kael to his feet. Kael stumbled, his strength sapped, his spirit broken. They retreated into the smoke, two figures swallowed by the defeat they had engineered. Lysander turned to Elara. There was no praise in his gaze, only a fierce, urgent assessment. "The southern breach is contained. Torvin holds the west. The ridge runners are retreating." He gripped her arm, his fingers firm. "But the battle is not won." "It has moved," Elara asked, the cold knot of dread tightening. "The main Moonfall force never engaged here. This," he gestured at the smoldering breach, the bodies, "was a feint, a violent distraction. Seraphina is not with them." The meaning crashed over Elara. "Where is she?" Lysander's jaw tightened. Scouts report a concentrated Moonfall column, led by her personal guard, bypassed the fighting entirely. They used the chaos to slip into the Wraith Woods. His silver eyes bore into hers, reflecting the flames. "They are not heading for Shadowfen. They are heading for the heart, for the Blight Pool." The world seemed to tilt. The coils inside Elara gave a violent, synchronous lurch, a tidal pull toward the woods. The Devourer's voice was a razor of glee and terror. "She comes, the clever, hollow queen, she comes to bargain with the dark, to offer what is not hers to give. She's going to try to treat with it." Elara breathed, the horror absolute. "She thinks she can control it, use it. She will get herself and every wolf with her consumed," Lysander said, his voice grim. "Or worse, she will succeed in rousing it further, in breaking a seal we cannot repair." He released her arm. "You are the warden, the seal is yours. The heart is your domain, this ends there, now." He was sending her into the woods, into the place where her power was born and where her enemy now marched, to face the devourer and the woman who had stolen her life on the ground where all worlds met. From the direction of the woods, a new sound echoed, not a howl of wolves, but a deep, shuddering groan of shifting earth and splintering trees, followed by a chorus of chittering, eager cries that raised the hair on her arms. The children of the Blight were awake, and they were welcoming visitors. "Go," Lysander commanded, his form already turning back to the battle to secure her path. End this, alone, armed with nothing but the cataclysm in her soul and a title she didn't understand. Elara turned from the fire and blood of the settlement and ran toward the deeper darkness of the Wraith Woods, toward the beating heart of the corruption, and the final, fatal choice that awaited her there. Chapter 14. The silence of the Wraith Woods was a living thing. It was not the absence of sound, but a dense, watchful quiet that swallowed the echoes of the battle behind her. The moment Elara crossed the tree line, the world changed. The clash of steel, the snarls of wolves, the shouts of warriors, all were muffled as if by a heavy curtain. Here there was only the rustle of dead leaves under her paws, the creak of skeletal branches, and the low, constant hum of the blight in her blood. She ran as a wolf, her gray pelt a smudge of motion against the perpetual twilight. Her muscles burned, but it was a clean fire, fueled by a purpose that was finally, terrifyingly clear. She was not running from something anymore. She was running to it, to the heart, to the end. The woods knew her. They recognized the coil of corruption she carried within her, the fragment of the devourer's will that slept behind her ribs. The grasping, chittering things that lurked in the shadows did not emerge. She felt them, a pressure at the edges of her awareness, hundreds of pairs of unseen eyes tracking her progress. They did not hinder her, they observed. A silent, grotesque honor guard. You come to me, Key. The voice was not a sound, but a vibration in the marrow of her bones. It was the devourer, and it was pleased. She comes to treat, to offer tribute. But you come to claim your domain. Elara pushed the thought away, focusing on the trail. Seraphina's party had not bothered to hide their passage. The undergrowth was trampled by many boots and paws, the scent of moonfall wolves, tinged with Seraphina's cloying floral perfume and a sharp metallic fear, lay thick in the air. They were moving fast, driven by a desperate mission. The deeper she went, the more the woods transformed. The gray, sickly trees gave way to the bone-white, twisted sentinels that marked the approach to the blight pool. The air grew thick and cold, carrying the familiar scent of old blood, rot, and that underlying, chilling musk. The hum within her grew louder, a resonant chord that made her teeth ache. The coil in her chest stirred, uncoiling slightly, tasting the air of its birthplace. She slowed to a trot, then to a cautious walk, shifting back to her human form behind the gnarled root system of a giant dead oak. The rough bark scraped her palms. She needed her hands. She needed her voice. She pulled the simple bone knife from the sheath at her hip, the anonymous gift from a shadowfen well-wisher. Its weight was a comfort. Peering around the root, the blightpool clearing opened before her. It was as she remembered, yet profoundly changed. The clearing was a bowl of dead, white earth. The pool of black, still water at its center reflected no light. The pulsing, sickly green veins of corruption throbbed across the ground and up the trunks of the trees, but their rhythm was different. Faster, anxious, anticipatory, Seraphina's force was arrayed near the water's edge. A dozen Moonfall warriors in human form, weapons drawn, formed a tense, outward-facing semicircle. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with a terror they were struggling to control. The corrupt scent here was a physical weight, and they were drowning in it. At the center of the semicircle, facing the pool, stood Seraphina. The Luna of Moonfall was a vision of calculated beauty amidst the decay. Her gown of deep blue velvet was travel-stained, but her golden hair was perfectly braided. She stood straight, her chin high, but Elara's sight flared to life without her command. She saw the frantic, flickering panic in Seraphina's aura, a sputtering orange-yellow. She saw the dark, thorny tendrils of ambition wrapped around her heart, and something new, a thin, shimmering cord of energy that stretched from her abdomen out into the world, the connection to her unborn child. It glowed with a fragile, pure light, utterly alien in this place. In Seraphina's hands, she held an object wrapped in dark cloth. Great One, Seraphina's voice rang out, clear and strong, belying the fear in her energy. Hear the offer of Moonfall. We bring tribute. We bring a pact. The black water of the pool stirred. Not a ripple, but a slow, viscous bubbling, as if something vast were turning over in the depths. The green veins in the ground flashed brightly. Speak, little queen of nothing. The devourer's voice echoed in the clearing, not just in Elara's mind, but in the air itself, a dry rasp of stone on stone. The Moonfall warriors flinched, weapons shaking. Seraphina swallowed, her composure cracking for a second before she reforged it. The one you seek, the key, she is an abomination, a blight upon the living. My mate, Alpha Kael, has united the packs against her and her corrupted master. Shadowfen will fall by dawn. She took a step forward, holding out the bundled object. We offer you this, a relic of the first wars taken from the sacred stones of Moonfall. It is steeped in the blood of Alphas, in power. We offer it freely. All we ask in return is the key. Give her to us. Let us purge her, and the corruption she spreads ends with her. You will have your tribute, and we will have our purity. Her words were a politician's words, a deal-maker's words. They were utterly, catastrophically wrong. A sound emerged from the pool, a low, gurgling laugh that smelled of opened graves. You think my hunger is for trinkets, for blood-soaked stones. The voice was amused, and the amusement was more terrifying than any rage. You think the key is a weed for you to pluck. She is the lock, she is the door, she is the root and the crown. You offer me a pebble and ask for the sun. Seraphina's face went as white as the trees. I don't understand. You offer me what is already mine. The devourer's attention shifted, a pressure lifting from Seraphina and turning towards the tree line where Elara hid. Come forth, warden, claim your audience. Every Moonfall head snapped towards her. Weapons were raised, Seraphina's eyes found her, and a complex storm of hatred, triumph, and sheer disbelief washed over her features. Elara stepped out from behind the root. She did not draw her knife. She walked slowly into the clearing, the dead earth crunching softly under her bare feet. The eyes of the corrupted creatures in the woods pressed in. The eyes of the terrified warriors tracked her. The burning, golden consciousness in the pool focused on her alone. Elara, Seraphina spat the name. You see, even this ancient evil acknowledges your sin. Come quietly, your death will spare many. Elara ignored her. She walked until she stood halfway between the tree line and the pool, directly in the line of sight between Seraphina and the devourer. She could feel the black water calling to the coil inside her, a siren song of absolute, welcoming oblivion. I am here, Elara said, and her voice did not shake. She offers me a dead thing, the devourer mused, speaking to Elara as if they were alone. She understands nothing of life or of death. She seeks to bargain with a force she thinks is a wolf like her. She is a child playing with a wildfire. The golden glow in the water intensified. But you feel it, don't you, Key? The truth, the agony, the endless hollow hunger. And Elara did. As the connection flared, a torrent of sensation flooded her, not just the devourer's predatory intent, but the raw, screaming pain beneath it, the loneliness of an eternity trapped in a wound. The memory of a wholeness long shattered. It was a bottomless, aching need that mirrored her own years of barren emptiness, but magnified to a cosmic scale. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Don't listen to it, Seraphina shrieked, her composure shattering. It lies, it corrupts, warriors seize her. Two Moonfall warriors, driven more by loyalty to their Luna's order than by courage, broke from the semicircle and charged at Elara. They never reached her. From the shadows of the bone-white trees, two corrupted creatures, emaciated, wolf-like shapes with too many joints, flowed like liquid darkness. They moved with a speed the blighthounds in the woods had never shown. There was a wet crunch, a choked-off gurgle, and the two warriors fell, their bodies withering to husks in seconds. The creatures did not feed. They simply stood over the corpses, their empty eye sockets fixed on the remaining Moonfall wolves, as if waiting for the next order. The message was clear. This was sacred ground. The key was under protection. The remaining warriors froze, a low whine of pure animal terror escaping one of them. Seraphina stared, her mouth agape. Her plan, her diplomacy, was crumbling into dust before the raw, amoral reality of the force she had sought to bargain with. See, the devourer whispered to Elara, they are fragile, they are noise. She brings a spark to a forest already burning. But you could hold the fire, you could shape it. With you as my conduit, my queen, we would not just haunt these woods. We would cleanse the world of its fragile, chattering life. We would make it still, we would make it whole. No more rejection, no more barrenness, only perfect, silent unity. The offer was a serpent coiling around her soul. It promised an end to pain, to vulnerability, to be the source of fear, not its victim, to never be powerless again. Elara looked at Seraphina, who was clutching the wrapped relic to her chest like a shield, her other hand pressed protectively over her womb. She saw the thin, shining cord of her child's life force. She thought of the wounded she-wolf in Shadowfin's lodge, of Corin's hesitant kindness, of the anonymous gift of the knife. She thought of Lysander's stark, brutal faith. You are the warden. No, Elara said, the word quiet but absolute. The hum in the air stuttered. No. I am not your queen, I am your warden. She turned fully to face the pulsing, golden light in the pool. You are a wound, a sickness, and she drew on the sight not to see auras, but to see the structure of the blight itself. The clearing erupted in her vision, a web of pulsating, diseased energy, all leading back to a raging, torn nexus deep beneath the black water. The devourer was not the pool. It was the tear in the world that the pool had formed in. I am the one who contains you. She took a step toward the pool. Elara, don't you dare, Seraphina screamed, but it was a distant sound. Elara reached out with her will, not to siphon, but to command. She focused on the nearest green vein throbbing in the earth. She imagined not drawing its energy in, but compressing it, forcing it back into itself, sealing it shut. The vein flickered, it dimmed. A foot-long section of it went dark, the dead earth beneath it crumbling to gray, inert dust. A roar of pain and fury erupted from the pool, shaking the clearing. The black water churned violently. You dare to heal the flesh of my prison? It's not healing, Elara grunted, the effort of the compression a strain against her mind. It's patching the wall, foolish key, you are made of me. The golden light blazed. From the pool, a torrent of pure liquid corruption erupted, not a tendril, but a wave. It was the same attack that had nearly killed Lysander, but now it was aimed solely at her, a tsunami of annihilating hunger. Seraphina and her warriors stumbled back, crying out. Elara did not run. She planted her feet and opened herself. She did not try to deflect it. She pulled it in. The wave of black, iridescent energy hit her like a physical blow. It poured into her chest, into the waiting coil. Agony, cold and absolute, seared through every nerve. She screamed, a raw, tearing sound. Her sight showed her own body lighting up from within, a skeleton of crackling black-green fire. The coil swelled, threatening to unravel, to burst her apart and unleash everything she had ever absorbed in a single, catastrophic detonation. "Be filled, be broken, be mine," the devourer thundered. Elara fell to her knees, her vision swimming. The world was reduced to the screaming conflict within her, the devourer's will trying to shatter her control, her own will straining to contain a sun of negative energy. She was a skin stretched over a volcano. She was losing. Through the haze of pain, she saw Seraphina. The Luna was not looking at the pool or at her. She was staring, horrified, at the cloth-wrapped relic in her hands. The dark cloth was smoldering, burning away without flame. Where the corruption had washed over it, the relic within was reacting. With a final sizzle, the cloth fell away. It was not a stone, it was a horn, ancient, yellowed, curved like a crescent moon and banded with faded silver etchings. As the last of the cloth fell, the horn began to glow with a soft silver light, a light that repelled the corrupt air around it. A memory not her own stabbed into Elara's mind, a flash from the devourer, the silver howl, the binder's tool. Shattered, lost, the relic wasn't a tribute of power. It was a fragment of the very artifact that had helped bind the devourer in the First Age. Seraphina, acting on instinctive greed or sudden, misguided inspiration, raised the horn to her lips. "No," Elara tried to shout, but it was a whisper. Seraphina blew. No sound came out, not one that ears could hear, but a pressure did. A wave of silent, concussive force, pure and resonant, erupted from the horn. It was a sound for the spirit, for magic, for seals. It hit the pool. The devourer screamed, a sound of true, unadulterated agony that split the world. The golden light flared and then dimmed, flickering wildly. It hit Elara. The silent wave passed through her, and the carefully contained cataclysm inside her resonated. The seal she was straining to hold, the patchwork of her own will and absorbed corruption, vibrated at a frequency it was never meant to withstand. The internal pressure found a fault line. Crack. It was not a physical sound, it was the sound of a destiny breaking. The coiled power within her, the devourer's fragment, the absorbed blight from the canyon, the siphoned strength from Kael did not explode outward, it ruptured inward. It collapsed in on itself, a black hole of corruption consuming its own vessel. Elara's scream cut off, her sight winked out. The world went dark, then gray, then silent. She felt herself falling, but not to the ground. She was falling inward, down into the void she had just become. The last thing she heard was the devourer's voice, not triumphant, but shocked. "What have you done?" And Seraphina's voice, trembling with hysterical victory. "I did it. I silenced it. The blight is broken." Then nothing. Elara's body lay still on the white earth, a small, gray figure between the terrified Moonfall wolves and the now quiet, dimly glowing pool. No breath stirred her chest. No light shone behind her closed eyelids. The bone knife slipped from her limp fingers. The wraith woods held its breath. The key had turned in the lock, and something had broken. Silence, it was the first sound, the only sound after the horn's silent scream. It was a thick, smothering quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. The chittering, the whispers, the wet, dragging sounds from the woods all ceased. The black water of the blight pool was still, its iridescent sheen gone, leaving only a dark, mirror-like surface. Seraphina stood panting, the bone-white horn of binding clutched in her trembling hand. Her knuckles were white. Before her, the monstrous form of the devourer had frozen, its burning golden eyes fixed not on her, but on the crumpled form on the ground between them. Elara lay on her side, one arm outstretched, her face pale and utterly still. No breath stirred her chest. The faint, shimmering aura that had clung to her, the one Seraphina had only been able to sense as a prickling wrongness, was gone. Extinguished, a slow, triumphant smile spread across Seraphina's lips. The fear that had been a cold stone in her gut melted, replaced by a soaring, giddy heat. She had done it. The horn, the ancient Moonfall relic said to bind wayward spirits and chaotic magics, had worked. She had seen the violent surge of power within the Blightwitch collapse, folding in on itself like a star dying. The oppressive, maddening pressure of the clearing had vanished. "So much for your key," Seraphina said, her voice loud and bold in the unnatural quiet. She addressed the frozen devourer. "A simple tool and she broke. Your power is broken. Now we bargain. I have demonstrated my worth. I can offer you more than a flawed vessel. I offer you the strength of a united coalition of packs. Serve me and we will carve a new world." The devourer did not move. Its form, a shifting mass of shadow and suggestion, seemed less substantial. The golden eyes dimmed. From the tree line, Seraphina's escort of Moonfall warriors emerged, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and terror. Beta Rylan was at their head, his axe lowered, his eyes wide as he stared at Elara's lifeless body. Luna, is it done? It is done, Seraphina declared, turning her back on the devourer with a regal flip of her hair. The entity was clearly defeated, its source of power severed. The blight is broken. The witch is dead. Gather her body. We present it to Kael and the others as proof. Shadowfin's weapon is gone. Rylan nodded, gesturing to two warriors. They approached Elara's body with cautious steps, their boots crunching on the brittle white grass. One knelt, reaching a hand to turn her over. Thump. A single, deep, resonant heartbeat echoed through the clearing. It did not come from any chest. It seemed to emanate from the ground, from the air, from the very bones of the trees. The warriors froze. Seraphina spun around. Elara's body hadn't moved, but the devourer's eyes blazed back to life, not with rage, but with a terrifying, profound curiosity. Thump, another heartbeat. This time, the black mirror of the Blightpool shivered. Ripples spread from its center, not from a drop, but from within. What is this? Seraphina whispered, her triumph curdling. Inside Elara, in the absolute void left by the horn's resonance, there was nothing. No light, no sound, no coil of contained cataclysm. It was a perfect, empty silence she had never known, not even in the deepest despair of her banishment. She was a shell on a cold floor, and within only echo. Then a spark. Not of corruption, not of the devourer's golden hunger. This was silver, a cool, clean, and utterly lonely point of light. It was the memory of moonlight on the stream the night she was cast out. It was the feel of the gray wolf pelt in the waypoint shelter. It was the silent, watchful strength in Lysander's silver eyes. It was her, not the power she housed, not the title forced upon her, but the core that had endured, the she-wolf who had walked the Wraith Woods alone. The spark grew not by consuming, but by remembering. It remembered the ache of barrenness, not as a curse, but as a hollow space waiting to be filled with something of her own choosing. It remembered the terror of submission and the fierce, defiant will that had answered Lysander's challenge. It remembered the feel of healing, of taking something broken and making it whole. It remembered the weight of the bone knife left by a friend in the dark, the silver light unfolded not as a weapon but as a definition, a boundary, a self. And in that defined space, the collapsed power stirred. The cataclysm the horn had compressed into a singularity began to move again, but it did not explode, it orbited. The silver core became a gravitational center, and the chaotic, hungry darkness of the blight became a slow, swirling vortex around it, contained, controlled, and fundamentally separate. Elara was no longer a conduit. She was a cosmos. Thump, her heart beat, her own heart, not the devourer's pulse, hers. Her eyes flew open. They were not the warm brown of her youth, nor were they the burning gold of corruption. They were storm gray, and in their depths, miniature silver stars swirled around pupils of absolute black. She drew in a sharp, gasping breath that sounded like the wind returning to a still forest. The kneeling Moonfall warrior recoiled with a cry, scrambling backward. Seraphina stared, her face a mask of disbelief. No, impossible. The horn binds all magic. Elara pushed herself up to her knees, movement slow, deliberate, testing. She felt immense, not powerful in the way of muscle and fury, but vast. The clearing, the woods, the distant fens, she could feel the flow of life in them and the stagnant pools of corruption. She could feel the terrified, buzzing energy of the Moonfall warriors, the cold, ambitious calculation of Seraphina and the devourer. She turned her head toward it. The entity watched her, its hunger now tempered by a wary, ancient fascination. You tried to make me a queen, Elara said, her voice layered with echoes as if many spoke at once. To wear your crown of decay, you tried to make me a key to turn in your lock. She rose to her feet, steady. The silver star swirl in her eyes brightened. I am neither. She looked at her own hands, turning them over. With a thought, a wisp of inky corruption bled from her fingertips, coiling like a pet snake. With another, it was gone, replaced by a shimmer of pure, silver light that smelled of frost and clean stone. I am the space between, the warden, the balance. Kill her, Seraphina shrieked, her composure shattered. Now. Before she completes whatever this is. Rylan and the warriors surged forward, axes and claws raised. They were brave, loyal to their Luna, their fear overridden by command. Elara did not raise a hand to fight, she simply exhaled. A pulse of pure, silver energy expanded from her in a silent wave. It passed through the charging warriors like a ghost. They did not fall, were not harmed, but as it touched them, their rage, their battle fury, their blind obedience, it dampened, cooled. They stumbled to a halt, weapons lowering, looking at each other in confusion, as if waking from a violent dream. The will to attack had been gently, firmly washed away. Only Seraphina remained untouched, shielded by her own bitter ambition. She stared, horrified, at her spellbound warriors. You cannot fight this, Seraphina, Elara said, taking a step forward. Her voice was normal now, just her own, but it carried with absolute clarity. You cannot bargain with it. It is not a king to be treated with. It is a wound in the world, and I am its healing. Healing, Seraphina spat, backing toward the tree line. You are a monster, a plague. Kael was right to cast you out. Kael was afraid, Elara said, and there was no anger in it, only a profound sadness. And you fed that fear. You traded the future of a pack for your own status. Look what it has wrought. She gestured to the clearing, to the silent, watching devourer. You led them here to the heart of the nightmare for politics. A new sound cut through the clearing, the sound of running feet, of snapping branches, of low, commanding growls. From the opposite tree line, figures burst into the open. Lysander led them, his charcoal fur sleek with sweat, his silver eyes blazing. Behind him came Sable, Corin, and a dozen Shadowfen guards, their faces set in grim determination. They skidded to a halt, taking in the scene. The frozen Moonfall warriors, the terrified Seraphina, the looming devourer, and Elara, standing calm and centered in the middle of it all, her eyes glowing with an inner galaxy. Lysander's gaze locked on Elara. He saw the change, the vast stillness in her, the controlled power humming just beneath her skin. The terror that had gripped him when he felt the horn's resonance, and the subsequent silence was replaced by a staggering, cautious awe. Elara, his voice was a rough scrape. I am here, Alpha, she said, and the title held new meaning. Not submission, but acknowledgement, a warden reporting to her commander. Seraphina saw her chance. While all eyes were on Elara, she turned and fled, crashing into the woods toward the south, toward the sound of distant battle. Sable made to give chase, but Lysander held up a hand. Let her go, she runs to a broken army. His attention never left Elara or the Devourer. The battle at the fen is over. Silvermane holds the west. Moonfall and the Ridge Runners are rooted. Kael is broken, but this, he looked at the ancient entity, this is not over. No, Elara agreed. She turned fully to face the Devourer. It is time for it to end. The Devourer's form solidified, the shadows drawing in until it resembled a massive obsidian wolf, though its shape bled and shimmered at the edges. Its voice, when it spoke, was no longer a chorus of whispers, but a single, deep, and weary tremor that vibrated in their bones. You have done what none other could. You have not consumed me. You have not joined me. You have contained me within yourself, a perfect prison. Not a prison, Elara said, walking toward the black pool. A hospice. She knelt at the pool's edge. The Shadowfen guards tensed, but Lysander shook his head, watching, his every instinct screaming to protect her, yet knowing this was beyond his protection now. Elara placed her hands on the cold, dark earth where the water met the shore. She closed her storm-gray eyes. Inside her, the silver core blazed. The orbiting vortex of blight slowed, then began to unwind, not outward but downward. She channeled it through her hands, not as a weapon but as a filter. A sigh moved through the wraithwoods. The twisted, bone-white trees began to tremble. From their bark, from the soil, from the very air, thin tendrils of puce green and inky black corruption were drawn forth. They streamed across the clearing like ethereal vines flowing into Elara. She absorbed them not into her core, but into the controlled vortex within her, compressing, purifying. The Devourer watched, its golden eyes wide. You take my children, my essence. I am taking the infection, Elara grunted, the strain evident in her voice. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The sickness, the pain, you are not the corruption. You are the source trapped within it. You are the first wound. She pushed deeper. The black water of the blight pool began to lighten, from ink to gray, from gray to murky, then clear blue. The rotten, metallic scent faded, replaced by the clean, damp smell of fresh water. The Devourer's form began to shrink, to diminish. The terrifying pressure of its presence lessened. The burning gold of its eyes softened to a warm amber. The agony, its voice was faint now, a whisper on the wind. It is less. It will never be gone, Elara said, her voice strained but gentle. The scar will remain, but the wound can close. With a final, monumental effort, she drew the last thick cord of corruption from the now clear pool. It snaked into her chest, and she shuddered, bowing her head. Inside her, the vortex spun, dense and potent, a contained storm of ancient blight. The silver core held it, separate, eternal. When she looked up, the blight pool was just a pool, reflecting the pale sky. The trees at its edge, while still twisted from centuries of malformation, showed hints of green moss, of life returning. Where the Devourer had stood, there was now only the faint, shimmering outline of a large, weary wolf. Its eyes were kind and sad. Thank you, Warden. The image faded, leaving only a sense of quiet and a single, sun-warmed stone where its heart would have been. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of held breath, but of peace. The woods were just woods again, deep and old and watchful, but no longer hungry. Elara swayed, the immense effort crashing down on her. Lysander was there in an instant, catching her before she fell. He held her, not as an alpha holds an asset, but as a man holding something precious and fragile and unimaginably strong. It is done, she whispered into his shoulder. The war, he asked, his voice low. The war is over. The blight is in remission. It is contained within me. She looked up at him, the starry swirl in her eyes fading, leaving only her own storm-gray gaze, exhausted and clear. It will always be with me. I am its warden. This is my role. Lysander searched her face, then gave a slow, single nod. He understood. The weapon was sheathed, but it would always be a part of the shield. Then Shadowfen is your home. And I am your alpha, not to command you, he added, a faint, grim smile touching his lips, but to stand with you, to guard the guardian. A week later, under a full moon that shone on a healing land, Elara stood at the border stream. Not the one she had been banished from, but a different one, marking the new, agreed-upon boundary between Shadowfen and a shattered, leaderless Moonfall. Kael was gone, vanished into the wilds with Jax and a handful of loyalists, his spirit and power broken. Seraphina had been found by Ridge Runner scavengers, her ambition a cold trophy. Moonfall was now led by a weary council of elders, desperate for peace. On the other side of the stream, a delegation waited. Alpha Torvin of Silvermane was there, his massive arms crossed, his expression one of grudging respect. Beside him stood his beta and warriors from both their packs. Lysander stood at Elara's right shoulder, Sable at her left. Corin and the red-furred sentry, along with the Shadowfen healer who had once scorned her, formed an honor guard behind. The canyon is clean, Torvin stated, his voice carrying across the water. The air does not sicken my scouts. You have fulfilled the pact, Warden. Elara inclined her head. The blight is a wound that can be managed, Alpha Torvin. Not with swords, but with vigilance. Shadowfen will share what we learn. A new pact, then, Torvin said, looking at Lysander. Of vigilance, of shared watch on the old wounds. Silvermane agrees. Shadowfen agrees, Lysander replied. There were no grand ceremonies, no blood oaths, just a nod across flowing water. The coalition against them was dissolved, replaced by a wary, practical alliance born of shared survival. As the others turned to go, Elara lingered for a moment, looking south toward the forests that had once been her home. She felt no pull, no regret. The barren she-wolf was gone. In her place stood a woman who carried a universe within her, a silver core and a contained storm. She was not a Luna. She would bear no pups. She would command no warriors. She was the warden of the Wraith Woods, the living seal, the balance. A hand, warm and sure, settled on her shoulder. She didn't need to look to know it was Lysander. Come home, Elara, he said, his voice quiet. She placed her hand over his, feeling the steady strength there, an anchor to her vastness. She turned her back on the past, and together they walked north into the deep, quiet green of the fen, under a sky that was, for the first time in centuries, truly clear. The end.